Let's get it. Let's start the full set review. Timer start now. We start with white. We'll start with Aerial Boost because apparently it is alphabetically the first card in the set. This is 2 mana, 1 and a white, and it's the thing that convokes for an instant speed. It's a combat trick. A creature gets +2/+2 in flying till EOT. This actually is like pretty good. I think I haven't really talked about this card like at all this season. I think it got released in the final burst of commons, but I do like this card a good bit. It's basically a free +2/+2 in flying, get a creature through. This is potentially, and I mean like extremely potentially, standard playable. It would have to be in the exact right deck that plays a lot of these instants, like Illuminator Virtuoso, something like that, but it also has to play a fair number of creatures. And the Virtuoso deck plays like 16. So I'm not sure if you have enough to really make this card work in some decks, but in like mono white, it's a combat trick that potentially ends the game for effectively free. So I could see a setup where you like Brutal Cathar their flyer away and then play this for free and get through for like 7 or less than that probably, 5 or something to end the game. So this I kind of have my eye on, but I don't think it's quite standard playable. But of all these like, limited combat tricks we see in every set, this is one of the ones that I've been paying the most attention to out of any of them that we've seen in the last couple of sets. So I like this, and I will give it out of 5. Remember, it's out of 5. A 2.5, right in the middle. I think this is, again, borderline playable in exactly the right deck. I like the sort of out of nowhere punch that it could provide. But anyway, is this going on YouTube? Absolutely. Let's move on to Alabaster Host Intercessor Ahi. We'll just call him Tuna. He's 6 mana, 5 and a white for a 3/4. This guy, Brutal Cathar, is a guy when he comes into play, but he can also plane cycling. And that's not bad. There's a few things with basic land cycling in this set, and most of them are obviously like just limited playable. I think this guy is also just limited playable, but he's like the most standard playable looking out of any of them, of the basic land cycling things that I can remember off the top of my head, but he's still not standard playable. But in limited, this is common, right? For something you can cycle or is a removal spell on a pretty decent body, right? In standard, I will say this doesn't die to like cut down, lightning strike, and stuff that would normally kill the Brutal Cathar or something, but 6 mana is just way too much for this effect. Sees no play there, but I'll still give this a 2.5 too, just because I think that it's like just about right for limited play. You can't play too many because it's 6 mana, but I think it is worth playing in your limited deck most of the time. It is also worth pointing out, by the way, in limited, that this is going to blank most incubator tokens, right? Because like the biggest incubator tokens in this set tend to be 3/3s. So that might be something else. And also the fact that there are incubator tokens, period, makes this card a little bit better because it can just, when I meant blank, I meant like it can keep them from attacking or blocking well, but it can also just kill them forever. So that's a good thing to remember too. But move on to Alabaster Host Sanctifier. This is 2 mana. It's just a 2/2 lifelink, and it's fine. I mean, creatures like this are good 23rd creatures in limited. You'll hear me say that a few times tonight. So I really can't go much higher than like a 1.25 on this, but it's a card you'll play every now and again in limited. Angelic Intervention is next. This is the protection spell in the set, and this is a tough one to score. It's the best card that we've seen so far, and probably will see play in some constructed formats, although that is tough. Because, the farther back you go, there's better options, like Brave the Elements, just a better card in most cases in like modern than a card like this. In standard, it costs a little bit too much mana compared to some of the other options we have. So it actually is kind of a tough call. I'll give this a 2.75, which means, again, like borderline playable. But I think that if the right deck finds it, it's going to be really good in that deck. Again, Illuminator Virtuoso might like a card like this. Let's move on to Archangel Elspeth. This is a 4 mana Planeswalker Elspeth. This card, probably pretty good in the mono white deck. I think that it slots in day 1 and stays there. I don't think that they're going to take this card out if they put 1 or 2 in. They put 3 in, they'll take 1 out. I don't think you play any more than 2, but you definitely don't play any less than 1. It's a great card for that deck. I also think it's like halfway decent looking in mono white aggro, but you really got to justify 4 drops in your aggro decks nowadays. They got to be very good if you're going to play them. And I'm not sure that this kind of like, let's be honest, like kind of grindy-ish value is really where a deck like mono white wants to be. But that -2 is stout. That is a very good -2 to punch through damage. But it's basically the first card we looked at, isn't it? You know what I mean? When you think about it, I'd rather pay nothing for that effect than 4 mana, right? even if I do theoretically get it twice. But this is a better Planeswalker than I've seen a lot of people gauge it as. So I'll give Archangel Elspeth a 3.5. I think it's right in that, not absolutely game-breaking incredible, but a little bit more than solid. We'll almost certainly see some standard play, but it might not see too much play outside of that format. But obviously, if you get in limited, it's an incredible bomb. So we'll say 3.5 for now, but it could go down to 3.25. I'm not super comfortable with 3.5. That's a very good score. Attentive Sky Warden is 3 mana. This is a Windrake that can transform incubator tokens. It's just fine. I got to give Windrakes like a 1.5 usually. Bola Slinger is up next. This is the 4 mana 2/2 that backs up and taps stuff. It's a tapper that backs things. This is a little bit too much mana, to be honest, but I do like the sort of ETB value on a guy like this, and I think it's decent tempo and limited. But if you end up not backing him up and he's just a 4 mana 2/2, you better be getting a really good tempo swing, because I'm not really sure that you want to be paying 4 mana for a 2/2. If you don't get a great tempo swing the next turn, you kind of wasted a lot of mana on your 2/2. It could have been a 4/4. Your opponent spent their 4 mana on a 4/4, and now you're in trouble. So again, the tempo swing has to be pretty good, but it can be decent in some aggro decks. Wouldn't play more than like one copy of this a lot of the time, though, I think. So I'm just going to give this like a 1.25 as well. I think that it's just kind of fine. Boonbringer Valkyrie. I'm going to rate this a little bit higher than I think a lot of people would. This is the new Baneslayer Angel that I think is probably just better than Baneslayer Angel in 90% of situations. So with that in mind, definitely consideration for the sleepers list, but I think you could make the argument enough people are talking about this, it's not quite a sleeper, but I do think that enough people have forgotten about it that it might be at this point, just with how exciting everything else in the set is. I think people just kind of forget about BBV, and I think this is a sweet card, and I'm going to go ahead and give it a 2.75. I think it's fine. Cut Short is a decent removal spell. This is the almost Wandering Emperor ability with Convoke. It doesn't exile, though, and it doesn't gain life. Those are some of the best things about that ability, but this is still a decent piece of instant speed removal. So I'm going to give this 2.5 as well. This is a definite limited playable card. You'll play as many copies of this as you get in limited. I did say in the sleeper video that there's a lot of vigilant creatures in this set. That is true, but counter to that is that there's also a lot of Convoke in this set and limited. So even if your opponent's creatures are vigilant, they may still tap them for Convoke abilities, and Cut Short can cut them down, which I do like. So I don't like the confusion of having Cut Down and Cut Short in the same format. That's, not too many cut names. Cut it out. But let's move on to Dusk Legion Duelist. This guy's great, man. This guy's really good. This is the 2 mana 2/2 vigilant guy that draws cards when +1/+1 counters are put on him. You only get to do it once a turn, but I think this card is balls, like balls out. Not balls in. I think this guy, sorry for the not safe for work comment. I apologize. What I meant was the soda. You remember Balls the soda? We're going to turn it into nostalgia. That's what, you remember that? The caffeinated soda that tastes like Sprite with a little bit of cream soda. It's good. It's good soda. What happened to Balls? Anyway, this card is Balls in that it's energy. It's gas. It's a good, see, I turned it around. I'm a talented man. This card is a little bit messy, honestly. But I think this card is like straight up good. I really do. There's a lot of ways to put counters on this. And yeah, I know it's a little bit slow, but here's the secret to this card. It's not embarrassing at first blush, right? 2 mana 2/2 vigilance. A lot of cards like this would start as a 2 mana 1/1 and be completely unplayable. But the fact that this is like not good, but not embarrassing stats with a keyword ability at the very beginning of things, I'll take it, dude. I'll take this. I don't know that I love it on the draw, but on the play, this seems like it's really good, man. On turn 3, it's fairly easy to put a counter on this in like 50 different ways in 50 different formats. So I don't know, man. Like all you got to do in Historic or Pioneer or whatever, Luminarch Aspirant, and then this guy, and you can do it in that order, right? Luminarch Aspirant on 2, this guy on 3. Go ahead and draw your counter. Like I like it, dude. You won't be able to put a counter on Aspirant that combat step, but I also kind of like don't care. I think that this card is much better than it's getting any credit for. So I'm going to give this card a straight up 3. I'm serious. I think it's probably that good. I really do. It might have to wait until rotation to see some standard play, but I think there are decks that want this. And if there aren't decks in standard that want it, I think there are decks like in Commander that want this card. That's pretty reliable card draw if you can set it up right. I like this thing. Let's move on. to Elish Norn. Is it the best card in the set? It could very well be. This line, I've said this a million times, but this line of text, the middle of this text box right here, that's what you need to be paying attention to. And do not underrate this ability. It might just look like it's kind of irritating, but you can deal with it. No, this ability, you're going to hate it. In like 2 weeks, maybe less, you're going to hate this ability. I promise you. This may be, if not the strongest card in the set, like in the top 3, I would say. So I'm going to give Elish Norn a 4.25. I really think this card is that good. I don't want to talk about it too long because I've already talked about Elish Norn like a million times. I feel like I've taken a lot of time to talk about in the ins and outs, the different gameplay, the game states this card is good in that are very common game states. So I think that Elish Norn is unbelievably, stupidly powerful on the front and the back. If you want, it's the first card we have to transform. There's too much value. It does 8 different things. That's a little bit of hyperbole, but honestly, not that much hyperbole. It's a very good card, and I think that is kind of self-evident. But 4.25 might seem like a really high score, maybe low to some, but I bet a lot of people are going to say that's too high. But I really think the hype is real on Elish Norn. This is a good Magic card. We'll move on to Elspeth's Smite, the 1-mana removal spell of the set. That is pretty heavily restricted, but not that heavily restricted. It also exiles, which I kind of like. You know, it acts like a bolt to an attacking or blocking dude, which is not terrible. You want to be able to hit battles and planeswalkers and players and all that stuff, and it sucks that it only has the one target in this day and age. What are you doing? But but that one target, I mean, for 1 mana, that ain't bad. I don't think that a lot of decks are going to replace Lay Down Arms with this anytime soon, but I could actually be a little wrong about that. But a lot of the decks that play Lay Down Arms don't really care about the sorcery speed or the fact that it gains the opponent life. So who knows? I don't think that one gets traded for the other, but this is a better removal spell than it might look like, and I would play a couple copies in limited if nothing else. So I'll give it a 2.25. Enduring Bond Warden is next. Somebody said that this card, I pointed out that it's a cute bunny, and then somebody else said it was a squirrel. And I'm just not sold that it's either one of those things at this point. The more I keep looking at it, I'm like, are you a bunny or a squirrel? I don't know. But the card itself is just kind of okay. You know, it's really not a very impressive card. It's the 1-drop 0/1 in the set. And I just have to give that like a 1. If I could give it a 0/1 for flavor, I would. This is among the weaker looking cards in the set to me, but obviously there's some kind of setups with this where you have a bunch of counters on a guy, you back that guy up, and then he dies, and you get a bunch of counters on a thing. Yeah, maybe, but I'm not sure the card is necessarily worth all that setup. But we'll move on to Essence of Orthodoxy. This is 5 mana. I'm pretty sure this card is not available to play in limited. I think it's in the Jumpstart packs. But it has flying. It's 5 mana, 3/3 flyer, and you incubate 2. This probably would be a little busted in limited, but not that busted in limited, honestly. As it is, I'm just going to give this card like a 2. I don't think it's that playable. I know it technically puts a fair amount of power and toughness on the table, but it also just kind of sucks. It's just kind of obvious the card is not great. Art is kind of cool, but we'll move on to Golden Scale Aeronaut. This is the 5 mana 2/3 backup 1 with flying, just a normal Magic card. Nothing to see here, totally normal, 1.5. Guardian of Girapur up next, 3 mana for the 3/3 that blinks a thing, not a resto. Restoration Angel is a million times more annoying than this card. I still have nightmares about Restoration Angel. I just wake up like, Thragtusk! You know, this is not as annoying as that, but it's still a pretty disgusting card that I actually want to play a lot. This can blink like prototype stuff and bring them back into play as the big version. That's pretty cool. Obviously, repeat ETB triggers and stuff. Reset your Reckoner Bank Busters. That might be important in mono white. A lot of cool stuff about this card. So I'm going to give it a solid 3.5. I think this card is that good. I really squab it. Back to Enduring Bond Warden. Why? Por qué no listos? Why can't it be a squirbit? But let's move on to Heliod the Radiant Dawn. Been a while since we read this card. It was part of the original previews like months ago at this point. It feels like it was years ago, literally. I don't love this card. And I'm kind of an enchantment lover. I really do be liking enchantments. And look at what this flips over. This is an incredibly strong card to flip over into. All your spells have flash. Pretty good. And then spells you cast cost 1 less to cast for each card your opponent have drawn this turn. So that's good. So just spells you cast cost 1 less to cast on your opponent's turn, at least. And they also all have flash. It seems very good. It really does. But I don't know. Concealing Curtains is a fine card, but it has also taught me the lesson that transform is just like this exact kind of transform is extremely risky. It's not as good as you think some of the time. But this does create some sort of value when it ETBs. And if you get it flipped over, which isn't the highest cost in the world, let's be honest, it does something outrageous. So I don't know why I'm so down on this card. Just my feelings on it are, but that's all subjective. That's my feelings. As far as objectivity goes, I think the card might be okay. But to be a white 4-drop right now, you got to beat Wandering Emperor, and you got to beat Elspeth for that matter, and even for that matter, a couple of other cards like Sarah Paragon. So it's just really tough to make it in the 4-drop game, especially when you do something as narrow. Let's face it, as narrow as this, you have to build your deck accordingly to make this work, and not every deck's going to be able to do it. I could see maybe the Hallowed Haunting deck trying to work this card in as a 1 or 2 of and seeing how that works out, because, you know, if you have a Hallowed Haunting in play and you can play your enchantments on your opponent's combat step, that's gross. So, like, that seems okay, right? So I'm going to go ahead and give this card like a 2.75, but it could be as high as a 3. I don't know why I don't like this card very much, because it's probably pretty good. But it is an objectively good Magic card. You think so? Yeah, I mean, I guess we'll see once we see what kind of play it gets in different kind of formats. Again, I think that the card is narrower than it looks, but 4 mana, not embarrassing stats, does something when it ETBs. So if your opponent does snag it when you try to transform it, at least it did something, you know. But I think we're in a removal check format for stuff like Elish Norn and Sheoldred and Phyrexian Obliterator and Rafine and a couple of other cards that I could really keep going on that one. So like everyone's packing 2 mana removal, and I'm pretty sure that you paid effectively 7 mana for your opponent's 2 mana. So they just go for the throat this thing. And I'm not saying it dies to Doomblade, but we are in a very Doomblade centric format that makes me kind of worry about stuff like this. But hell, Sheoldred thrives in this format, and like everyone's out to get her. So what do I know? You know, like who knows? The card could be good, but 2.75 is not the worst score. We'll up it to 3. I'll give this card a 3. Because obviously I feel like the card is strong on both sides, and I don't know what my problem is. So we'll move on to Infected Defector. This is 5 mana for a 4/3 when it dies, incubate 3. It's not great. It's just a completely normal Magic card. So we'll give that a 1.5. Inspired Charge is a reprint. This is usually about a 1.75. You got an aggro deck, it can be the clincher. Invasion of Bellamon. This is the one that creates a 2/2 Knight when it comes in for 3 mana. And then Anthems. This is a normal battle. It's not one of the worst, but it's also not one of the best. In limited, this is just fine, but not incredible. I will give this a 2. I think it's about a 2. Well, in limited, it might be better than a 2, but overall, when you factor in like constructed and limited play, I'll give it a 2. Invasion of Dominaria. This one I like a little bit more. This is the 3 mana one that gains you 4 life and draws you a card, and then flips over into Sarah Angel. This one's fine. I actually think in the right deck, this could see some standard play, but I think I like the card better that's instant speed. You gain life equal to the amount of cards in your hand and then draw a card. I think that card is just better at 3 mana for the decks that would want an effect like this. But I still think this card is cool. I'll give it a 2.25. It's all right. 2.5, sure. 2.5. We'll give it a 2.5. Invasion of Gobakon is next. Which one is this? Oh, yeah, it's the one that does the thing that white 3-drop does when it comes into play. It keeps, you look at your opponent's hand and something else costs, 2 more to cast. And then it flips over into this interesting thing that Luminarch aspirants all of your guys and can also sack to protect from certain sweepers. I think this card is probably better than it looks. I've got it picked for the sleepers list, but I'm not sure that it makes the sleepers list because I've got 16 cards picked for sleepers and I've got to cut some things right now. But I do think this card is fine. I think that it's Thought Siege. I like that. Thought Siege. That's how clever are you, Kane? You really are. You got good takes. But I think this one's okay. I think that I would rather have the 3 mana 3/3 body. I like that it comes with a 3/3 body, the guy that does this. Whose name it's always on the tip of my tongue, but I always forget what it is. But I again, for 2 mana, you get a 1 mana discount. I think it's great, and it's really easy to attack this down. It's so easy to attack this down. So I want to give this like a 2.75 because I think it has some potential. Invasion of Pharaohs is next. This is one where you search for an aura or a god or a demigod. And then on the back half, you get a Phara, which is just like a super enchantress. So this is one of those where, oddly, even though I love Enchantress and I don't really care for Heliod, I love Enchantress, and I really like this card. Even though it doesn't actually do anything, it doesn't affect the board state the turn you play it. It also doesn't technically, especially the turn you play it, help you attack it down, right? And I like battles that help you attack them down the turn you play them by removing a creature or giving your guys a boost or something. This really doesn't do that. And 3-mana tutors in Standard just have proven to not be the best cards recently. So I don't think the card is super playable, but I do have a soft spot for the back half of this thing. So I'm going to give it a 2.75. I was going to give it a 3, but I'll switch my ratings for Heliod in this, mostly from social pressure. But I do think Heliod's probably the better card. But the fact that this can get indestructible very easily, I think is a big selling point. So I do like this card a lot. Kithkin Billy Rider is the 3-mana 1/3 double strike. It's fine. Again, normal card. There's not that many auras in this set, but there are ways to modify your creature's PT. So it shouldn't be too hard to get through for like 6 with a Billy Rider out of nowhere occasionally. You know, the free +2/+2 spell or whatever. So I could see it. I'll give this a 1.75. I like double strike as an ability. Knight Errant of Eos. This is Dees. It's Dees. I do worry about when an aggro deck can afford to actually cast this card. It is a 4/4. That's a stout body, but it's not the other thing. Venerated Loxodon. It's not that card. Loxodon was way better, I think, than this. It's meant to call back to Venerated Loxodon, but this doesn't put any extra PT on your guys. It doesn't help you attack any better. It doesn't function like an Anthem effect that's also a 4/4. It doesn't do any of those things. It really doesn't. So I would say that in an aggro deck, this kind of card advantage, especially for this much mana or this much in an investment, which is in an aggro deck, this is a pretty big investment, like tapping down 2 guys that now can't attack. Huge investment in aggro because you want to kill your opponent in as few turns as possible. If you're tapping down guys, that's harder to do. That was the thing about Loxodon. Loxodon, you can tap down guys, but it kind of sped you up a little bit. If you planned on untapping the next turn anyway, like not finishing the game that turn, it was usually pretty beneficial to play Loxodon and get some more power on the table. This just doesn't do that. So the more I think about it, the more I don't like it, but I still am going to give this card a 2.5. I think it could be solid-ish, you know. Knight of the New Coalition, though, is not great, but this is the 4-mana 2/2 that gives you another 2/2. They all have vigilance. And this will help with convoking stuff. It'll help in the sort of aristocracy draft deck that we see, the sacrifice deck. And it'll just help with like tempo and aggro and stuff like that. I think it's a little bit too much for an aggro deck, but this is a pretty body-centric format where I think sort of attrition is going to matter and getting board presence is going to matter, like more so even than usual. And obviously limited tends to be a very board presence oriented format, right? But I think even more so than usual this time around in this card could be a great way of generating that presence. So I think it's a bit of a bread and butter common. I don't want to rate it too lowly. I think it's actually like a 2.25. Core Halberd, and again, that's mostly on the strength of its limited playability, but I don't think it's a bonkers card in limited. I just think it's beneficial enough to enough strategies that you'll play this card more than you might think, depending on what you're doing. But Core Halberd is next. I actually like this little piece of equipment. I tend to like 1-mana equipment so long as they do stuff that matters. And this does a few things that matter, but not enough, right? Not enough. So I'll just give this like a 2. Solid 2. Monastery Mentor is up next. A reprint and a good one to have in a set with a bunch of Convoke, you know? So I think that's pretty cool. If you're building the draft Convoke deck, you open this up, you're going to be happy. But I'm not sure that Monastery Mentor is as good as it used to be standard-wise. I am interested in playing this with like, Third Path Iconoclast in the 2-drop slot, but I got problems with that too. You go Third Path Iconoclast on 2. You don't do anything else. You just expose them to removal. You don't get any value yet. And you play this on 3, and you still haven't got any value out of your mind, either your Mentor or your Iconoclast. You have to like untap on turn 4 with both of them in play to get real value, and that's going to be tough. So I think most of the time the way to play that is to play Iconoclast on 3 and then play a spell, and then play Mentor on 4 and play a spell. You got to get value out of these guys, or else they're just like 3-mana 2/2. It's not great. So I want this guy to be good in standard, but we'll have to wait and see about that. Mentor has been in the past, but format has to be really grindy. And again, go wide has to be a real deck. And it's just kind of not right now, If Naya Tokens was a real deck, I don't think this would be in it. I think it would just be, whatever his face is, the Naya guy from New Capenna. It would just be that guy deck. Why can't I remember the names of cards now? I told you guys I was like, super tired. Starts with a J. I don't know. You remember the guy I'm talking about. And I just don't think that this card really fits into a deck like that, even if tokens was a thing. But just on the strength of good times and nostalgia, I'm going to give Monastery Mentor a solid 3. I think it's right in that ballpark. Jetmir. That is the name of the guy. Thank you. Let's move on to Norn's Inquisitor. This isn't terrible. It really isn't. It's just a 2-mana 1/1 when it ETBs incubate 2. And whenever a guy transforms into a Virexian, you get a +1/+1 counter on the Virexian. So basically this kind of incubates 3 so long as it's still in play when you incubate the thing, when you transform the thing. I think this card is okay. I really do. I think it's a 2-mana card that puts a body into play and also an artifact. And that's not the worst thing in the world. We've seen that be important on Bloodtithe Harvester, although Bloodtithe Harvester has the stats to back it up, whereas this doesn't. We've seen it important on like Voldar and Epicure, although again, Epicure is a 1-mana creature. This costs double that. So I'm not sure that this is any better than like Ambitious Farmhand. It's probably worse. Spirited Companion, it's probably worse. Or any number of other like 2-mana 1/1s in white that do something when they ETB. This is probably worse than those, but noteworthy that those 2 cards don't create artifacts. So if there's a white deck that wants to play, you know, a cheap body that also just puts an artifact on the table, it's possible that Norn's Inquisitor's here, but this is only ever going to be a role player at the very, very most, and it's probably not even going to get there, so I'll give it a 1.75. Virexian Awakening is next. This is neat in your like Phyrexia commander deck, I guess, you know, but 3 mana for Incubate 4 is not the worst thing in the world, especially when that's going to trump most Incubator tokens, right? Most Incubator tokens are 2/2s or 3/3s. So if you Incubate 4, you haven't beaten every creature in the set, but you've beaten just about every Incubator token, you know. And then your guys have Vigilance, which is good in a set with Convoke again. And I kind of really like this art too, for what it's worth, but that won't get any extra points. I will give this, it's kind of a 5-mana 4/4 when you think about it. That's not the absolute worst rate in limited, so I'll just give this a 2. It might be slightly higher than that. I do like an effect like all of your Phyrexians have Vigilance. It seems good, but we'll bump it up to a 2.25, sure. Phyrexian Censor is next. This is the rule of law on a stick for non-Phyrexian stuff. I think this card is gross. This card is actually like probably much better than it looks, honestly. So I'm going to probably go ahead and give this, like, and it kind of looks good too. So I'm going to give this like a 2.75. I don't think that it's close to 3 territory, and I'm pretty sure it actually won't see much standard play, if any. Seriously. I don't think it's quite on that level, but I think 2.75, like it's knocking on the door, you know. It's real close. But Virexian Pegasus is up next. This is another Windrake. There's a few of them in this set, but this is the one that attacks and makes another dude fly. So it's that card. I pretty much always give that a 2. Progenitor Exarch. This is so sick card in limited, and this is another one that's a little sleepery. I'm not sure it makes the list, but it is very close to being sleepery, you know. The scalability on this is really impressive. I also like that it can create multiple artifacts when it ETBs. I think that's good. It's decent sweeper protection, especially off the top. It's great late in the game if you do top deck it. And the tap ability is not god-awful, considering what it does. So I don't hate this card. It's also a cat for the cat cube. That might matter. It's a little parasitic in terms of the mechanic featured on it, but I also don't care. I like cats for the cat cube. You need them. But one way or the other, I'm going to give this card kind of a 2.75. Like, I think it's, again, like knocking on the door. I think it's almost standard playable, and it actually might surprise us. But it also could just be a pile of garbage. And it's likely that. Realmbreaker's Grasp is up next. This is just a better pacifism, but it's not as good as the other thing that we saw in 1. It's just a better version of this, but still, any version of pacifism is always a 2.5. You know what I mean? Like, it's extremely limited playable. You'll play every single copy you get in limited. And even though it's not standard playable because better versions of it exist, if there wasn't an ossification or a planar disruption, is that the name of the better pacifism? Like, if those cards didn't exist, you might actually consider playing this. Seriously, if those cards just weren't around, pacifism is always something. So there's that. Scroll Shift is next. Great card, especially, I think, for Commander. But it could see some standard or even Pioneer modern play. I'm not sure if there's just better cards. I think there are. I think there's just a 1-mana thing, Ephemerate. I think it's just Ephemerate. It's just a better card. Am I right? Just 1 mana for Blink a Guy, and that's probably better. However, This also can blink artifacts, enchantments. That could be interesting. Reset a wedding announcement or something, maybe. Or just protect an enchantment from removal. You could do that too. And then draw a card is a pretty powerful line of text, obviously. So I want to give this card a 3. I think this is a pretty solid Magic card that might see standard play. Seal from Existence is next. This is one of the best Oblivion Ring effects that we've ever seen. And it's just kind of quietly in this set. It also depicts like the climactic moment in the story. So that's pretty cool. But as far as a removal spell goes, you have to be fairly heavy committed to white, but not like that heavily committed to white. I think it's possible to see some standard play again. Not all the standard play, right? Like, you know, in the hallowed haunting deck or something. This probably just becomes your new banishing light, or whatever, you know, whatever you're playing in that spot to emulate banishing light. I just think that Ward 3 is very good. It's not hexproof, but it is intensely good to have Ward 3. So I'm pretty sure this is great, and I'm going to give it a 3. I'm just going to do that. But it's Disruption, Planar Distortion, Disruption. Yeah, I was close enough. Anyway, Seedpod Caretaker is, thanks for the check. Seedpod Caretaker is next. Another 3-mana 2/2, but this one, when it ETBs, you put a +1/+1 counter on an artifact or dude, or you can transform an Incubator token. I think that the first ability is probably the one you're going to be doing a good bit of the time, but saving money on transforming Incubator tokens could be really important in this limited environment. So I like him, but he's not great. Just a kind of okay guy. I'll give him a 1.5. Seraph of New Capenna. It's another Windrake, but this Windrake turns into a fallen angel, sort of. And that's pretty good. It's actually one of the more solid Windrakes we've seen. Here's the thing. Windrakes are playable. They're good cards. In limited, they tend to be the baseline for, 3-mana flyer. You want a Windrake that does something. And this Windrake that does something really good. Now, you might get bodied when you go to transform it, and that's going to suck. So be careful. But, when it does transform, you get what is often a 5-power flyer when it attacks. And that's great. So I'm going to give this a 2.5. Again, I think it's just as playable as like a removal spell in limited. I think it's right there. Sigiled Sentinel is up next. This is 3 mana, 2 and a white for a 2/2 with backup 1 Vigilance. Extremely normal card. I'll give it a 1.25. Sunblessed Guardian is, again, very normal. It's just a 2 mana 2/2 that transforms into this 3/3 guy that does stuff. But I don't know how much I love this card. It is solid. 23rd card, 2 mana 2/2 is not embarrassing. I like 2 mana guys that have relevance late in the game. And this does that, but I still don't think it's a super impressive card. I will give this a 2. Sunder the Gateway is up next. Sneakily very good card. Sorcery Speed Disenchant that can only hit non-tokens. Who cares? But it also incubates too. Like, technically this can blow up a Fable of the Mirror Breaker and kind of put a 2/2 into play. Almost sideboard playable. Like, I don't know if it's quite sideboard playable, but it's getting close. And if your opponent doesn't, like if this card is just blank in the matchup and your opponent doesn't have a target for it, you can still incubate, whatever. If it is in your main deck. So I kind of like this card a good bit. I'll give it a 2.5. Sunfall is up next. This is the 5 mana exile all the dudes and incubate stuff. This is probably like a 3.25. This is a pretty effective sweeper, and exile is very good. Is it better than Farewell? I'm not sure. But especially in a vacuum, I'll give this card a 3.25. Very good. Surge of Salvation up next. This is the other protection spell in the set. This one costs 1 mana. That's the correct amount of mana. And it also hoses red and black, but it's probably main deckable beside that. This is likely the only main deckable color hoser. When we saw this one, I was hoping that more of them would be, but we didn't really get that much. That said, this is obviously a great Magic card. I'm going to give this a 2.75. If not a 3, it's probably a 3, more likely. But because of its probably mostly sideboardable nature, I'll cut a little bit. We'll call it a 3. We'll give this card a 3. Swordsworn Cavaliers next. This is the 2 mana 3/1 that can have first strike, so it's kind of okay. I'll give this card a 1.75. Dune Shaper is next. Tarkir Dune Shaper, to be exact. This is the 1 mana 1/2 that can transform into a 4/3 trample. Again, I don't love 1-drops in limited, but this one transforms into a 4/3. I still don't think it's great. It's going to die to a bunch of incubator tokens and stuff like that. Just not super solid, but it's okay. I'll give this card a 1.5. Tiller of Flesh up next. This card looks okay. 4 mana 2/4. When you cast a spell that targets anything, you can incubate too. So if you remove an opponent's creature, you incubate too. That's actually kind of nice, right? Well, if you remove it with a spell, you know what I'm saying, semantics people. But yeah, you point fading hope at something, you incubate to. Obviously, if you target one of your own things, you incubate to. So it's not like the worst thing in the world. It's not, but it's still kind of bad for the cost. The price is too high, whatever. So I'm just going to give this guy like a 2.25. I don't think he's as good as I want him to be. Zhalfir and Lancer is next. He's mostly just a callback to the fact that there were knights on Zhalfir. That's about it. But he's okay. You know, 3-mana 3/3 is solid and limited as, you know, in and of itself. So I will give this card a 2.25 as well. Artistic Refusal is our first blue card. I need to take a sip. We made it through the white stuff. Yeah, the 1-mana counter for Invoke Despair, that 1-mana white card we just looked at. Pretty good use case. Artistic Refusal is the first blue card. This is the 6-mana thing that convokes. It does convoke, and it kind of acts like 2 halves of a cryptic command, like the weakest cryptic command you've ever seen. I don't hate this card, though, but I don't think it sees like any real play. You know, the last 6-mana counterspell that saw real play was like Draining Welk. I think it was like 15, 17 years ago, so that's not going to happen. Card gets, I'll give it a 1.5. Really a 1.75 just for cool factor. Assimilate Essence is next. This is the counterspell that if your opponent can pay the tax, you get to incubate, which is just, I kind of like that. In terms of design, again, it's not totally dead late in the game. And a lot of these counterspells that make them pay are super duper like crappy, you know, past turn 6 or whatever. Like sometimes you'll rip off a Make Disappear on turn 9 because your opponent played too many spells or something. Like that will happen, but for the most part, I hate spells like this on turn 10, you know? But this can at least incubate. It's whatever. And like, if it is that late in the game and the card's not useful anymore, you probably have the mana to go ahead and turn the incubate token over into an actual creature and like block and stuff. So I don't know. It's better than it looks, but it's not incredible. It's really not. The battle is, I don't know how many times you're going to have occasion to counter battles in standard after week 2, but maybe some, so whatever. If nothing else, this is basically a worse Essence Scatter that is sometimes a better Essence Scatter. So I kind of like it, and I'm going to give it a 2.25. Astral Wingspan is up next. This card is not great. It's not Maul of the Skyclaves. It's the 5-mana thing with Convoke, the +2/+2, and flying's a thing. You also get to draw a card when it ETBs, which mitigates a lot of the problem with this card. It really does. And there's some cool combos. You know, you put it on that Kithkin, get in for 6. You know, it's cool. But either way, I think the card is just whatever. You know, I'll give it like a 1.5. Captive Weird is up next. I don't love this, but I should because the back half is kind of okay. When you transform it, you basically draw a card the red way, and it's a 3/3. And in the meantime, it's a 1-mana 1/3. And I think this card is like almost solid and limited. So I'll give it a 1.75. Change the Equation is the red-green hoser that's counterspell. I'm not super impressed by this. I think most of the time you just play Make Disappear. Maybe this comes in from the sideboard, but again, a lot of these color hosing cards don't actually seem very main deckable to me. But I could be wrong. You know, pseudo, like what, Spell Snare? Is that what this is? On the first mode? Could be okay, but I still don't love this. I guess in a lot of matchups, it's going to counter removal spells and other counter spells, and those could be important use cases, but I'm still not super impressed by this, but I do like the fact it's going to definitely see some standard play out of the sideboard, especially if green ever sees any play. You know? But I'll go ahead and give this a 2.5, maybe 2.75, but closer to 2.5. Probably better than I think, though. Chrome Host Seed Shark is next. This card is pure fun, but it can't be killed by Cut Down or Lightning Strike. I think those are kind of important metrics, but it can be killed. It can be killed pretty easily, but I can also see a situation where you get this on the table and you either cast counter spells to protect it, and that puts sharks on the table, or you or incubates on the table. It's not Shark Typhoon. It's really nowhere near as good as Shark Typhoon, which was basically like an uncounterable 3/3 or 4/4 flyer that drew you a card some of the time with the cycling ability. This doesn't have that, and that sucks because it's like the best part of Typhoon, but half the price of Typhoon's, you know, normal cost is okay. I like this card though. We're going to have some fun with it on stream, but I really can't rate it any higher than like a 2.75. I don't think it's going to see all the standard play in the world, but I really hope I'm wrong. Complete the Circuit is next. This is a wild one because this is the combo card of the set. It's the 6 mana Convoke thing that lets you cast sorcery spells as though they had flash. It lets you copy a spell twice. So like this could be a ridiculous card. Like there could be some combo somewhere that rules some format or another because this card exists. But in a vacuum, it looks a little bit too cute, to be honest. You need to play a fair number of creatures. You could just play instants and sorceries that create creatures. So it's not, completely out of the ordinary. It's possible to cast this and then still cast something else that turn. It is. But I'm not sure how great it's going to be. But I want to see somebody build an amazing deck with this card, but I'll have to see it to believe it. So I'm just going to give this card a flat 2. Corruption of Tawashi's up next. This is another neat card that I like a good bit. I like drawing cards when transform stuff. That's not bad, but it costs way too much. It's not constructed playable pretty much at all. I can see it seeing some playing like a niche commander deck that wants to transform stuff, but as it is, I'll give this a 1.5. Disturbing Conversion is next. This is the thing that decreases a creature's PT equal to the number of cards in its controller's graveyard. Sneakily okay some of the time, especially considering it mills 2. So it's at least -2, -0, probably more than that. And it has flash. Doesn't see any standard play whatsoever, period. But in limited, this is probably a little bit better than it might look. I'll give this a 2.2. I'll give it a 2. I'll give it a 2. If Pharaohs Dispersal is up next, this is better than it looks. I don't know if it's better than Fading Hope, but it's the one that can do an impression of Fading Hope and have a more powerful ability. Surveil 2 is just so much better than Scribe 1. And it happens no matter what. The creature doesn't have to be tiny. So I like this. I think it probably takes Fading Hope's place if there's a deck that needs to be done in. Upon rotation. Not right now, but upon rotation. Maybe even right now, but I doubt that. I really do. You cast Fading Hope EOT so often that I'm just not sure about Dispersal. But after rotation, I could see this being like actually played. Either way, in the vacuum that we're looking at it in for now, I could see this 2.5. Yeah, we'll give it a 2.5. Expedition Lookout is next. This is just kind of okay, but it's not amazing. It can't be blocked later in the game. When your opponent has like Mega Threshold, it can be blocked, but that still doesn't impress me too much. I'm Shania Twain tonight. I'm going to give it a 1.25. Eyes of Gets, and I know it's a 1 mana or 2 mana 2/3, but usually these 2 mana defender guys in blue are 2 mana 3/3s. So it's worse than you think. Eyes of Gitaxias is up next. It's just 3 mana sorcery, incubate 3, draw a card. It's not very good. It's not a super good card. The art is extremely disturbing. It's the most noteworthy thing about the thing, but I will give this a 1.75. Fairy Mastermind is next. Neat card that could potentially see play in multiple formats. It's whenever an opponent draws their second card each turn, you draw a card. You can make them draw cards too. It's kind of interesting. But I'm going to give this guy a 3.25. I'm not sure he sees all the standard play in the world, but he'll see some play somewhere. He's a neat little dude. And he might just be sideboardable, honestly. But against decks that will draw the extra cards, you can achieve parity with it. But I'm not sure that he's like super worth the 2 mana. I'm a little reticent to give this card the 3 that I just gave it, but I'm going to give this card a 3. I gave it a 3.25. You may have noticed I sneakily decreased it to 3, and I'm keeping it there. But let's move on to Furtive Analyst, the 3 mana 1/4 Vigilant guy that loots for mana. It's not great. That is not a super good card. 3 mana 1/4s, and it can convoke and block pretty well. And like those are noteworthy things in some limited decks, so it's not completely useless, but I'm still just giving it a 1.5. Halo Charge Scab is next. This could be pretty decent because it's a 5 mana 4/4 that effectively is going to put a removal spell back on top of your library in limited. Obviously not standard playable at all, but I think the card's strength in limited is enough to give it a 1.75. Interdisciplinary Mascot, I believe, is also from Jumpstart, so you're not going to be getting this unlimited, which kind of sucks because, it's Convoke 5/5 Ward 3 that impulses when it ETBs. This, I want to actually be like a very good Magic card, but I think even with Convoke, it's just kind of priced out of that. But I could be wrong. If you have 3 dudes on the table, this costs 5 mana for a 5/5 Ward 3 that impulses. And that is doable. It is. So I'm going to tentatively give this card a 2, but it's either actually a 1.5 or a 3.25. But I'm just going to give it like a 2 or 2.25 for now. But I kind of have a feeling about this one, but it's probably wrong. Even with Convoke, 8 mana is just ridiculous. So we'll move on to Invasion of Arcavios. This was in the Professor's like best commander cards in the set. And it could be. You know, it tutors one of 3 zones. It gets 1 card when it comes into play. Famous mistake from the beginning of previous season that I made. For some reason, I thought the and or on this meant that you could pick 1 from each zone, but I do not think that it means that. The back half of this, though, is very good. It's like unbelievably good. You just copy all the instants and sorceries you cast. That's unbelievable in Commander. So I could actually see this seeing some play in that format, but I'm not going to give it any more than like a 2.5 or something. You know, I'm not super impressed, but I could see it being pretty good once flipped over, obviously. Invasion of Kamigawa is a limited only saga. It's the thing that stuns something when it comes into play for 4 mana. And then becomes a 2/3 flyer that draws when it deals combat damage. It Ophidians when it deals combat damage. This is like pretty good in that environment, but only in that environment. And I'm still not sure how incredible, because you might not flip this over ever. And if you don't flip it over, it's just 4 mana for a stun counter. That's bad. So I'm just going to give it like a 1.5. Invasion of Segovia is up next. This is 3 mana for 2 1/1s and then a 3/3 that untaps guys. And does this non-creature spells you cast have Convoke? Like, let's go. It costs 4 to flip over, in defense points. That's kind of a lot. But 3 mana for 2 1/1s is not the most embarrassing thing in the world, and it helps with Convoke in and of itself. So, when you factor in that Limited has a bunch of those Convoke spells, and just the fact that these are 2 relatively powerful lines of text in and of themselves, I'm going to give this card a straight up 3. I really think it's like very close to being there. Invasion of Rin is next. When it ETBs, draw 3, discard a card, and then on the back half, when you attack it down, you can copy a spell you control by sacking it and just paying 1 extra mana. That strikes me as okay. It's a pretty big investment on the front half, but, it's Sift. Draw 3, discard 2, or discard 1. So it's not the worst dig in the world. I would probably rather just play Big Score in my deck than this, but the ability to copy a spell is obviously pretty broke, so I'm going to give this a 2.75. It might be disgusting. Jin-Gitaxias is the Blue Praetor. It's okay. Well, this is another one we looked at a bunch because it's been out for longer than some of the other cards. It doesn't impress me as much as some of the other Praetors that we'll look at, as much as Sholdred or Elspeth, Elish Norn. I think it's probably worse than those, but it's somewhere firmly in the middle of the pack in terms of Praetors. So I will give this right at a 3. Again, you can't deny that it's a good card. It does so many things, especially if you ever can flip it over, and it's not that hard to flip over. It really kind of isn't, but 7 cards can be tough, right? But if you build your deck right, it shouldn't be too difficult. So I don't hate this. I'm just not sure it's the control finisher it really wants to be, right? But 3 is still a decent score. Meaning of Minds is next. This is the Convoke 4 mana draw 2. I think this card's okay, but just okay. I'll give it a 2.25. Moment of Truth is up next. This is just kind of a much better Anticipate. Like much, because one of the cards goes into your graveyard, which in some decks is like drawing a card, So I'm going to give this like a 3. really, it's like 2.75 or 3. It's in that territory. It's a fine card. Negate is next. What do you give Negate but a 2.5? Oculus Whelp is up next. This is just kind of whatever, it's Snapping Drake with a little bit of extra text. But it's good extra text. Drawing a card when you have a transform permanent whenever this dies. So long as you have a transform guy draw a card is probably okay, but I'm still not sure that it's like worth playing multiples in your limited deck. So I'm just going to give it a 1.75. Omen Hawker is up next. This could do some nasty work in multiple formats. This is basically the best blue mana creature of all time. Like, is that possible? I really think that's probably a true statement. Well, am I missing something? I've got to be missing a guy, but maybe not. I really think this is like up there. So I'm going to give this a 3.25. It's not Lawn War Elves. It's not the 3.5 that you have to give to Lawn War Elves, like the close to 4. You have to give a guy like that, but it's obviously a strong Magic card. Oracle of it's narrow. It is narrow, so you got to take some points off, but it's strong. Oracle of Tragedy, I really like. I like this card. A lot of utility on this that I think is really good. But at the same time, I'm really not going to give this any more than a 2. It's playable. somewhat, but is it that playable? I guess we'll have to wait and see. It could be better than it looks. I think it might be, but I still don't really want to give it any more than like a 2 1/4. Let's say that, 2 1/4. Order of the Mirror up next is another 2 mana 2 power dude that transforms. And when he transforms, you get this dude who has flanking. He's not great. This is not like the best card. Sorry, everybody. So I'm just going to give this a 1.5 as well. I do like that it has some significance later in the game in limited, but you sure do have a lot to spend your mana on in limited, don't you? We've got more mana sinks in this set than we've ever had, whether it's incubate tokens or transform dudes or whatever. You have got to spend some mana in this environment. So is spending 4 mana or 3 mana and Virexian mana to do this, is it better than spending mana on transforming other stuff in the set? Because you've got a wide range of options to choose from, and you'll have more than one way to spend your mana on a lot of turns. I'm not sure this dude is where you want to be. Preening Champion is up next. I really like this guy. He too is a Windrake. If every 3-drop is a Windrake, is Windrake still good? I guess we'll find out. Especially when you get a Windrake that creates an extra point of power and toughness. Just an extra token to convoke stuff or whatever. I like this card. I think it's pretty solid and limited. I will give this a 2.25. Protocol Knight is next. This is the 4 mana 3/4 that stuns a thing. If you have another Knight, but it at least taps a guy. I don't love this stats wise, but if you do get a stun counter, it's decent, like more than decent tempo. So I'll give this guy a 2.25. Referee Squad, another decent tempo-y card. This convokes, has vigilance, so it can convoke. If you have copies of it out, it's pretty easy to convoke more copies of it into play and stuff. So that's why it's uncommon. You can't draft 5 of them. You know what I mean? It's going to be really tough too. And again, it's tempo in that it stuns stuff. I mean, I really think that for a 3 mana 2/2, this is actually like somewhat exciting a little bit, especially again in the limited environment. I think this card is okay. Just the ETB trigger is more than fine. So I'm going to give this a 2.5. Let's give it a 5, 2.5, the same as we would give a strong removal spell in limited. I think this is a decent body. Rona, Herald of Invasion, is up next. One of my favorite cards in the entire set. Both sides of it do very cool stuff, but again, in constructed environments, you have to be very wary of paying 5 or 6 mana at sorcery speed when your opponent has cards in their hand. You do not want to pay 5 mana and 2 life and just let them go for the throat your Rona. You don't want it. Trust me. But at the same time, the card still looks strong, even if you never flip it over. It's a Merfolk Looter with higher toughness that untaps and probably goes directly into the Esper Legends deck. So I think the card is destined to see some amount of play. It kind of reminds some people I've seen in chat of the like $100 Jace Vin's Prodigy from Magic Origins. I don't know if I go that far or anything, but I still think the card is quite good. And I'm going to give it a 3.25. Let's sit around there somewhere. Cyber Cryptomancer. A lot of people like this, myself included. My favorite comment on the video this card is in is, I'm pretty sure you can use Cryptomancer to give a creature hexproof when it ETBs. Like, yeah, I talked about that for 5 straight minutes. It's pretty much what the entire, it wasn't that long, but yeah, it's pretty much what the entire body of me talking about this card was about. That's the point of the card. You are absolutely right. I love you, commenter. You're probably a big fan. I'm not trying to shade you. But in case it wasn't clear, yes, you can give a creature hexproof when this comes into play. That's the good part of the card. I think this card is solid, man. I'm going to give it a 2.75. C Double is up next. This is a neat one. A lot of people wanted to tell me that this can copy your opponent's spells, which is pretty obvious. Again, sometimes I don't say things during spoiler season because they just say it right there on the card. I don't have to say the thing because there it is. I don't have to say this copies opponent's spells. It does. It's the card says that it does that. But in any case, this does copy opponent's spells, and that's gross. That's just very gross. It's probably quite good. It's probably okay because it can do that, but it can also just be a clone. It can just be a 4 mana clone, and that's kind of sick. Instant speed 4 mana clone, like a clone with flash. You know, this is a good Magic card. I'm pretty sure. So I'm going to give this a 3. I might regret that because 3 is actually like kind of high. I don't know if people understand how high 3 is. I'm really inclined to give this a 2.75, but I'll give it a 3 and give it actually room to grow. It could be even higher than that. I think this card is pretty disgusting, honestly. You know, whatever you copy will go on the stack first. That might matter a good bit. You know, there's a lot of I can see this card being nuts. We'll move on to Skyclave Aerialist. Just a 2-mana 2/1 flyer you can transform into a thing that can Coiling Oracle, which is just fine. I really think that's pretty good in terms of how much you're paying initially for the card and what you're getting when you do transform it safely. So I'll give this a 2. It's fine. Stasis Field, I want to give this a 2 as well. It's not as good as a normal removal spell, but it's still a removal spell, in air quotes, that you will play in blue, I think, a lot of the time. So 2 at least. Temporal Cleansing is up next. This card is, I think, quite good time ebb effects that put creatures on top, just on top, tend to be really annoying. So second from the top is even more annoying. Sometimes the annoying thing about put the thing on top is that it replaces their next draw step, and they really need a good next draw step or they lose the game. So if you replace it with something they already have, nothing really changed and they have to spend mana on a thing they already had and they lose the game, right? So sometimes that can be good. This does not replace their next draw step, which you could argue is actually worse in a way. But these sort of plow under effects are usually better than they look. This has Convoke. I wish it was instant speed. It sucks that it's not. I think it hurts the card a lot. So I'm just going to give it a 2.25, but that is a higher score. That's at least, 2 ticks higher than I think a lot of people would give this card. I really tend to like these effects though in limited. But let's move on to Thunderhead Squadron. Yeah, for commanders. Ooh. Yeah, removal in commander. Look at it that way. It might be better than I think. We'll move on to Thunderhead Squadron, the 6-mana 3/4 flying Convoke guy. It's not great. Most of the time, you'll tap 2 guys and pay 4 mana for a 3/4 flyer, which is just a fine rate. It's not great. So I'll give it a 1.75. It's probably like a solid bread and butter kind of guy in limited, but not the best dude in the world. Tidal Terror is 6 mana for a 5/6 with Island Cycling, but you can make it go unblocked if you want to sort of use Convoke in a way. It's a fine card. I think you probably will in some games of limited with this card. Like a 5 mana, usually unblockable guy for what is not honestly a lot of mana. I'm looking at this guy for pre-release. Draft games might be a little faster and more streamlined as they usually tend to be. But this looks like a pretty slow format all in all, with people spending mana on Transform, people spending mana on Incubate, people spending time attacking battles, and this looks like a pretty methodical, slowish, limited environment. So I think a card like this actually looks ridiculous in Sealed, even in Draft again, but Sealed tends to be a slower format. So if I end up in blue at the pre-release or whatever, and I get Tidal Terror, which is a freaking common, I'm taking a really good look at this card. I think this could easily end games in Sealed all night long at the pre-release. Not necessarily a sleeper, but a sleeper in limited all day. This is one of those where it gives me the effect that people might be talking about this card on MTG Limited Twitter 2 weeks from now. So just remember where you heard it first. I think this card is going to be one of the most reliable game enders in blue for Sealed specifically, but possibly even Draft if the environment's as slow as we think it is. This card is very good in that environment. We'll not see any standard play, but I am going to give it a 2.5 because it is at the upper echelon of just limited play. But that's all it's going to see play in is limited. But 2.5 is, I imagine LSV might give this a 1.5. We'll wait and see. But is it Jumpstart only? If this card is Jumpstart only, then I would give it a 1.25. But if it is playable and limited, which I think it is, then yeah. Yeah, it's a good card. Well, we'll move on to Transcendent Message. I will answer this with one person. Not for nothing, who are the people to follow for standard MTG Twitter? I didn't catch that your question said standard at first. Me. Just follow SBMTG Dev. That's all you need. Follow Crokies. He's a pretty good follow for standard. But if you just want a great MTG follow on Twitter, Shivam. SHIVAM. Follow that guy. He's cool. But anyway, Transcendent Message is next. 4 blue mana and X for the instant speed Convoke thing that draws X cards. I again think this card is better than it looks, but maybe not quite playable still. I'm going to give this card a 2.25, but I really want to give it a higher score than that. Wicked Slumber is up next. You stun counter up to 2 different guys, but you can double stun 1 if you want to. It's kind of neat. I think this is decent tempo and limited, but usually stuff like this is not super playable. It takes up a slot in your deck, and that's just not great. So you have to be very tempo oriented for this to be right, and you have to take massive advantage of the 2 turns their guys are tapped down. However, I think some of the time this might act like a effectively cheaper version of Sleep, and that card can be very good for shutting down games of Limited. So maybe it's better than it looks, but I'm going to give it a 1.75 for now. Xeric Strobe Knight is up next, a 5th or 6th Windrake in the set. This one has flying and vigilance, and if you cast 2 spells, you can tap it to make a 2/2. That's good. I think this will win games of Limited. Now, you have a lot of transform guys in the set tying up your mana. You have incubate dudes in your set tying up this mana. I'm not sure how much you plan on double spelling depending on what your limited deck does, but if you have the kind of limited deck that can tap this guy like twice over a given game, you're probably doing okay. And he can attack and still tap in the same turn. He can also tap to make dudes on your opponent's turn if you're doing just wild stuff, right? But I wouldn't expect that to be too reliable. But one way or the other, this guy's decent with Convoke if you can cast multiple spells in a turn, because like he'll create more dudes to help you convoke more and stuff. Like, he's not bad. I do like this guy, and again, at its baseline, at the floor, it's a better Windrake because it has Vigilance. So I'm going to give this card a 2.5. I think it's very good in Limited. Zephyr Singer is up next. Again, a little sleepery. This is the 4-mana 3/4 flying Vigilance that also puts a flying dude on each creature that convoked it. So again, not necessarily Venerated Loxodon, but even though it doesn't give you more power, I still think just like Venerated Loxodon, this makes you a lot more likely to win the game when you untap on the next turn. And if they kill the Zephyr Singer, you still left behind so much value. Like, a lot. You made like 2 guys get flying if you did this right. And if you do tap 2 guys to play it, you paid 2 mana for a 3/4 flying Vigilance. That's a pretty good deal. You had to tap the 2 guys. It's a resource, but like, that's a good deal. I feel like if you tap even a single creature for this card, he's okay, right? Or she's okay. It's a 3-mana 3/4. You cast Serendib Efreet with Vigilance that doesn't deal damage to you every turn for what it's worth, and also puts a flying counter on something else. That's value. That literally counts as value. If they killed this, you still added something to the table by playing the card. This card is good. I'm fairly certain this card is good. I'll give it a 3. Zephyr Winder is up next. 2 mana, 1 and a blue for 2/1 flyer. And when it deals combat damage to a player, you untap a thing, usually it. This will help you convoke stuff. 2 mana, 2/1 flyer, not embarrassing and limited. I like that it's common. I'll give it a 2. Zalfiran's Shapecraft is up next. 2 mana for the 1/2. And this turns a thing into a 4/3 and you draw a card. Just the fact that this cantrips makes it much better than these effects normally would be, but I'm still not sure this is incredibly playable. I'm really not. So I'm just going to give this a 1. Even with the cantrip, I'll give it a 1. And then we get to move into black. Okay, let's take a sip. Oh, goodness. Okay. Let's go. Aetherblade Agent, the first black creature. This is one of the only like common, cheap, like 2 mana transform guys that I really like, because for 2 mana, you get a 1/1 Death Touch. Usually in Limited, we want our 1/1 Death Touches to be 1 mana, but I still think this is a super playable stat line in and of itself. I just like cheap Death Touch guys. I like 2-drops that trade with 5-drops. That's what I like. So I like this dude. And then anything he does beyond this is just sort of gravy, but he does something really good, basically 5 mana to get a 3/3 Death Touch that affinigens. It draws cards when it gets through. That's pretty good. So, I don't think it sees any standard play, but just as a limited playable card, I'm going to give this a 2.25. I think you want to play this every time you're in black, like no matter what. Archpriest of Shadows is up next. Again, it's doing the face. It's making what appears to me to be a very inappropriate face that I've seen somewhere before that I don't want to talk about. But it's a 5 mana 4/4 backup with Death Touch. And you see, it resurrects things. It reanimates things when it deals combat damage. But since you can back up stuff, you can do this effectively out of nowhere. I don't know that it's as good as like Olivia, but it might be better than Olivia. It really might be better than Olivia. Because if this dies, the creature you reanimated stays out. I will also say this. If you throw this on the table, if you have multiple dudes in your graveyard to reanimate, especially good ones, you throw this on the table, and out of nowhere, you get through for combat damage with something else, and put a creature on the table. Okay, so what if your opponent can't remove Archpriest of Shadows? What if they can't do that? Well, next turn, you've got whatever you reanimated, whatever huge dude you reanimated, you're attacking with that. And you're also attacking with a 4/4 death touch. So if they block it, whatever they block it with dies, guaranteed. And if they don't block it, you get to get something else back. That's pretty good turn-over-turn value that could actually end the game, like, pretty quickly, just in a couple of turns. Like, this is actually a massive threat once it's on the table. And it has effectively ETB value. Even if it does die, let's say your opponent can take care of it, and the creature that it reanimated, or whatever, the turn it came into play. Well, you still got value in the form of a +1/+1 counter on whatever you put the counter on. Like, this card actually gives you a fair amount of value. And I don't want to talk about it all day, but I am going to give this card a 2.75. Even though it's very likely a bulk rare, I think there might be something to it. But let's get to Ayara, Widow of the Realm. Now, this, I really, really want to like this card. The fact of the matter is I do like this card, but I don't know if I should. You know what I mean? 5 mana to transform. I've got to hammer this home. Even though some of these look very good as Magic cards, 5 mana at least to transform is so much. You are going to feel terrible if you pay all of your mana and 2 life on a late turn in the game where things are starting to get pivotal. You know, at this point in the game, if you pay 5 mana and you use all your mana and you pay 2 life, you're tapped out and your opponent is able to deal with this play, you know, target it with Go for the Throat before it flips or whatever, while the ability's on the stack, you're going to lose the game. Like, you're probably in a delicate position at that point. If you tap out to do nothing and spend 2 life and all your opponent had to spend was 2 mana, they're probably going to untap and do whatever they want, which involves stomping your face in. So like these transform cards, even when they look super powerful, might not be as powerful as you think. And they have to do something really good like Elish Norn or Urabrask or whatever to be truly worth like consideration. And I'm not sure Ayara's quite there. You have to untap with this card in play. It doesn't do anything the turn it comes into play unless you have 8 mana and 2 life, right? So there's that. And even then, does it do anything? Yes, you can reanimate a guy if you have 8 mana and 2 life. So that's kind of neat. But yeah, obviously it combos with itself. It's worth, I like sacrificing stuff. I like that it sacrifices artifacts. That's kind of cool. You don't really want to sacrifice tokens and blood tokens and treasure tokens to it because it won't do anything if you do that. Kind of lame, right? But still, I like some of the stuff this does. And when you sacrifice stuff, you can get it back, when you do flip this card over. All of it's kind of neat, and I do want to really like this card, but, in a vacuum and as spiky as I want to be, I really can't make this card. I can't put this card any higher than like a 2.5, which makes me angry too. Don't get me wrong. But I really think when the smoke settles and the dust clears, this card's like a 2.5 or a 2.75. If I gave Archpriest like a 2.75, I should really give Ayara a 2.75, at least. I know this card looks awesome. We're going to play it on stream. It's going to be really fun. We're going to do cool stuff, but I'm just not sure if, again, as a spike, all the ways that we normally, evaluate cards, I'm not sure if this is good or necessarily better than most of the other black 3-drops you could be playing right now. Like Phyrexian Fleshgorger, Gix, especially Graveyard Trespasser. They're really good options in black at 3-drop, and I'm just not sure this is where it needs to be, but I want to play it. Bladed Battle Fan is neat. This is an equipment that is also a protection spell. Costs a little bit too much mana, double what it should, but I'll still take it. And give the card a 2.25, sure. Blight Reaper Thallid is up next, a normal magic card, just a 2 mana 2/2. And then when you transform it and it dies or transforms, you get a 1/1. So you get a total of 5 power on the back half. And it's still not great. I guess it makes a lot of sacrifice fodder, a lot of convoke or whatever, but still not super into it, even though it's not crazy embarrassing on the front half. So I'm just going to give this a 2, sure. Bloated Processor is up next, the most heartbreaking card in the set because you have to sacrifice Phyrexians to it. It couldn't just be a Nantuko Husk. That's silly to me, but I want to be objective. I will say, in limited at least, it's a 3 mana 3/2, and when it dies, you get 3 more power technically, so it's probably okay. I'll give this card a 2.5. Breach the Multiverse is up next. Could be a big old dumb finish a la, an ultimatum or some merge an ultimatum, but I don't think it's quite that. You also, your opponent has to have something you want in their yard. That's not going to happen every time, but it's going to happen enough to where the card is like tempting to play, but it's just the big black sorcery of the set that does something goofy and costs too much mana. These don't usually see a lot of play, and I don't think this one will either, although I'd really like to be proven wrong. But we'll just give this card a 2.25. Collective Nightmare is the free removal spell in black. Creature gets -3/-3, and it convokes for 3. This is fine. It's probably better than you think, honestly. Even if you think it's good, it's probably a little better than you think. I'll give this card a 2.75. Pretty playable depending on the deck. And always playable and limited. You play as many copies as you get there. Completed Hunt Master is up next. This is a 3 mana for a 2/3, and you can sacrifice stuff to incubate. It's okay. It's a fine card. I like that you can do this at any speed. Having to pay mana sucks, but it's only 1 mana. That said, again, I think your mana is really pushed up against a wall in this particular limited environment. I think that even 1 mana is more than you might think because you're just trying to do so much with your mana here. But one way or the other, being able to, turn your opponent's removal spells into your 3/3s, probably good, right? So, guy looks okay. I don't love a 3 mana 2/3 stat line in limited, but again, this is a kind of slower limited that I think pays off dudes like this pretty well. Because again, board presence is going to be important. Removal spells are going to be important, so I can imagine that a dude like this is actually pretty decent in limited. So I'll give him a 2.2. No, just give him a 2. Just give him a 2. Consuming Aetherborn is next. Just a 4 mana 2/2 backup lifelink. Not a super great card. I'm just going to give this card a 1.25. Corrupted Conviction is next. It's Village Rites, and Village Rites gets a 3. Really more like a 2.75, honestly. Deadly Derision is next. This destroys a creature or planeswalker at instant speed for 4 mana and makes a treasure token. I really want to like this card, but I'm going to give it a 2.5. It's a playable common removal spell in limited. You'll play every copy that you get. Dreg Recycler is next. I like this card. It taps to sacrifice stuff, so I like it, but it's not actually great if I'm being super objective. Let's just give Recycler like a 1.75. Sure. Extra quarter of a point because I like it. Etched Familiar. We've seen a lot of cards like this lately, I feel like, quietly. We've seen like 3 different cards like this in the last 5 sets. It's just a 3 mana 3/2. When it dies, it drains 2. It's not great, but it's not terrible either. It will trade on blocks with 2 drops, which sucks. But when it does do that, it does something. But not much, right? I'm just going to give this a 1.5. Etched Host Doombringer is next. EHD. Not EDH. EHD. 5 mana for a 3/5. When it ETBs, choose 1, drain 2, or choose a battle, remove 3 defense counters from it if they protect it. If you protect it, you put 3 defense counters on it. This card is just kind of like, okay, I don't love it. It will help you defeat battles, which is kind of important. So maybe some limited playability. I'll give it a 1.75. Veiled Conversion is next. This is the 5 mana -4/-4, and when a thing dies, you surveil 2. This is a fine card. Again, removal you'll play in limited, but this is sorcery speed 5 mana removal. So I'm going to cut it a little bit and give it a 2. Final Flourish is up next. This is yet another removal spell with Kicker this time. It's the one that can kill a 6/6 if you sacrifice a guy. I love this spell. I'm not sure how great it is, but you'll play every single copy in limited. And in sacrifice decks and aristocrats, you can play it dry and kill a dude if you don't have anything you want to sacrifice. Or if you have to sacrifice a guy, you can get a dice trigger and kill a huge dude. So I'll give this card a 2.75. I think it's pretty playable. Flitting Gorilla next. This is 3 mana for a 2/2. Look at that. It flies. It's also a Windrake. It is. But this one can put a creature or a battle from your graveyard on top of your library when it dies. That, actually not terrible, right? I mean, that's okay. It replaces itself when it dies, but it puts the thing on top of your library, which I don't love. But replacing itself is pretty darn good on a Windrake. So I'm going to give this a 2-ish, 2. I'll give it a 2. Gift of Completion. I want to like this card, but I don't love it. Even though it's an enchantment and it's got a pretty sweet line of text on it there at the bottom. It probably goes in your Phyrexian commander decks too, so that gives it a little bit of a push of a point. But ultimately, I'm not going to give this more than a 2. Glistening Deluge is next. This is the -2/-2 for 3 mana. All dudes get -2/-2. Well, really, all creatures get -1/-1. Creatures that are green or white get -3/-3 instead, basically. And that's all right. That's all right. I mean, what do you score these as? 2.5, right? Something like that. 2.25. Probably 2.5, but Gloomflying Mala is up next. This is 7 mana for a 5/5 swamp cycling, 2 backup, 2 menace. It's a decent reanimation target in limited specifically, and almost nowhere else will you see this card. I'll go to 1.75. Grafted Butcher is the Virexian Anthem effect. Extremely narrow card, obviously. Sorry, had a tooth slip. But anyway, this is an extremely narrow card that only works in like one deck. You know what I mean? But maybe it works in, maybe this is your 2-drop in mono black. I really doubt it. You probably still want to play Underdog and a couple of other things. But what if your next drop is Gix? What if your next drop is Phyrexian Fleshgorger? What if the drop after that is Obliterator or Shieldred? Is this playable in mono black as we know it with just a couple of tweaks? You know, it could be. So I don't hate this. I kind of don't hate it despite how narrow it is. It could be less narrow than I think. So I'm just going to go ahead and give it a... God, what do you give a 2-mana Anthem effect that's better than every other 2-mana Anthem effect ever printed? Let's give it a 3. Solid. Hoarding Broodlord is the 7/6 Convoke that Demonic tutors when it ETBs. And gives your exiled stuff Convoke. That's pretty good. But I'm still only going to give this card like a 2.5. I want it to be playable. It may be a sleeper. It may be a reanimation target, but I just think we have 4 better reanimation targets in standard, but who knows? It's okay. Ichor Drinker is next. This is the 1-mana 1/1 that you can exile from your yard to incubate too. This is a sick, like a cool little card, but I think it's just kind of cool. But this is the kind of ability that is occasionally pretty playable. So I'm just going to straight up give this a 2. Sure. Ichor Shade is next. I just hate this little guy. His art is awesome, but a 3-mana 2/3 at the beginning of your end step, if an artifact or creature was put into your graveyard from the battlefield this turn, put a +1/+1 counter on Shade. You could technically play this with blood tokens and treasure tokens and blah blah and make it big, but it would still take a while to make this card big, In 2 turns, it's a 4/5 vanilla guy for 3 mana. Ooh, not a big deal. So even in limited, I don't love this thing. So I'm just going to give this a solid 1. One of the not necessarily worst cards in the set, but one of the worst cards in the set. Injector Crocodile is 6 mana for a 5/5. When it dies, incubate 3, swamp cycling 2. This isn't the worst thing in the world. It really isn't. It's not a worm coil engine, but when your 5/5 replaces itself with a 3/3, you have to pay mana for it, but kind of replaces itself with a 3/3. It could be worse, but I still don't love it. I'm just going to give it a 1.75. Invasion of Eldraine up next. This is the discard one, isn't it? Yeah, they discard 2 for 4 mana, and then it turns into a kind of rack effect. I want to like this so badly, but I do not. It costs too much mana. It doesn't affect the board state. If I'm going to play Mind Rot in Standard, it better not cost a whole extra mana, 33% more mana for a Mind Rot for no reason. I don't love. So I'm just going to give this card a 1.75. Mostly, again, because that's... You might play it in limited. You might, but I doubt it even then. I really do. Let's give this card a 1.5. Much as I like this back half, it's just going to die to like a removal spell like super easily. Play with fire, and then what did you actually do? God, this card could have been better. But they are so scared of giving us like a decent rack effect for discard decks in Standard that we got Prickle Fairies. I'm Prickle Rick, but let's move on to Invasion of Fiora. This is the thing that can just blow everything up. You choose one or both, destroy all legends, destroy all non-legends creatures. And you get Marchesa on the back. This card is kind of cool. 6 mana is a lot, but interestingly enough, this is a real black sweeper. It's an actual black sweeper. It's not Path to Peril that requires white mana to be a real black sweeper. It's not some -2/-2 for 3 mana thing, It's not Dragged to the Bottom where we have to play a bunch of other lands in our deck for it to be a decent sweeper. No. This is just unconditional. Destroy all the creatures if that's what you want to do. If you have a Shieldred out and they don't have any legendaries, they're screwed, right? So I think it's a solid card on the front half. 6 mana is a lot for this, but black needed a sweeper like so bad that I'm willing to overlook a little bit the high cost of this because, boy, black did not have a sweeper, not a good one. And obviously getting Marchesa on the back is great. By the way, it's interesting that in the situation I just described, you have Shieldred, your opponent doesn't have any legendaries. You can play this, attack with the Shieldred, kill the invasion, and immediately get Marchesa that same turn. So this I'm going to go ahead and rate like a 3.25, which is really more than I want to give this card. I want to give it just a flat 3, but this is okay, right? A sweeper that draws cards and stuff. Like, yeah, it can also blow up another battle when it comes into play, or just kill a planeswalker. Like, yeah, that's a fine card. It really is. But let's move on to Invasion of Innistrad. This one I've talked about extensively, and I'm not going to keep talking about because, like, Gix's Command is one that is almost sweepery. On one version of it is sweepy, like one mode. And then, like, if you pick both removal modes, it usually acts like a sweeper. Not always, but sometimes. But Invasion of Innistrad is next. Again, I've talked about this card too much. I've made my feelings very clear. I think it's better than you do. I'm going to give this card a 3. Invasion of Ilgratha. The coolest thing about this card, even though it's a 5-mana pseudo removal spell, because it might not even kill anything they have. The best thing about this is it becomes Grandmother Sinjir. So I'm going to give the card an extra 1/4 of a point just on strength of that alone. Let's give it a 2. Merciless Repurposing is up next. 6 mana for exile target creature, incubate 3 at instant speed. 6 mana is a lot, even in limited, for a removal spell. So I might play one if I got it. Removal tends to be the best thing you can do, but 6 mana is a lot. But get rid of their best guy and incubate 3 is maybe worth playing one of these, so I'll give it a 2.25. Mirrodin Avenged is up next. This is kind of difficult to get working a little bit, but, you know, drawing a card for a single mana is pretty good, so I think I have to give this a 1.5. I just hate cards like this. Look at it, a 1.5. Nezumi Freewheeler is up next. This is a 4-mana 3/3 menace that mills 3 for everybody when it comes in. When you transform it, it becomes this menace 4/5 that can put a permanent back into play so long as it's a 2-drop or less. A lot of value on this guy, but ultimately I'm just not convinced he's great, especially, you'll see like 0 play in Standard, but even in Limited, I'm not like super convinced about this dude, so I'm just going to give him a 1.75. Nezumi Informant is up next. Just 2 mana for a 1/1 that discards a card from your opponent. Have you read this card on 4 different cards before? It's just Burglar Rat. It's even a rat. Hilarious. They just can't reprint Burglar Rat. They'll give you, I guess in your commander deck you can play like 6 Burglar Rat variants now, but still. What is Burglar Rat's score? Burglar Rat gets a 2. Virexian Gargantua is up next. This is just a 6-mana 4/4 that drains 2. Or no, it doesn't. You draw 2 and you lose 2. That's not terrible. It's really not the worst thing in the world, but I'm still just going to give this like a 1.75. Pile On is a wonderful removal spell. We'll give this a 3, I'd say, at least. Render Inert is up next. I want to like this. It can destroy battles as well as planeswalkers and draw cards. I think that's decent and limited, but I don't love in Constructed like spending a whole card to kill a battle. I just want to attack into it. I don't want to spend cards. I want to attack into it. So I don't know how great this card is, but I will give this a 1.75. I think it might be a little better than I'm, you're going to have to find a target for it, and it's not the easiest thing in the world, I'm telling you. So I really want to give this like a 1, but I have a feeling about it. We'll see. Scornblade Berserker, one of my favorite cards in the set. Do like this thing. It is the backup 1 guy, sack a creature, draw a card, sack this creature, draw a card. I just think this is great for Aristocrats decks. I want to try it in Elisokor and stuff, and Vron. So it's usually the same deck. But I want to try this out there. So I'm going to give this like a 2.5. Let's go 2.5 on this, even though I don't think it's super playable and limited. It has enough like promise and Standard that I don't think it elevates that deck day 1 to tier 1, but I still want to give it a 2.5 because I have a soft spot for it. And I like spells like creatures like this. Seer of Stolen Sight is the 3-mana 2/3 menace that surveils when creatures die. Also artifacts for that matter. And that's not terrible, but it's also not great. I've already said I don't love 3-mana 2/3s. So I'm just going to give this a 1.75. Shieldred is up next. This is a great card. This is a very good card, I think. Yet another thing that can make me sack a Kaya, which I just hate, but, one way or the other. Sacrificing a non-token creature is pretty good. I keep hearing the card just called like a 5-mana Fleshbag Marauder. Fleshbag Marauder lets them sacrifice a token, and 9 times out of 10, that's exactly what they do. And that's why Fleshbag Marauder is a fine card, but not great. In Limited, this makes them sack a non-incubator token creature, a non-1/1 token creature from Preening Wizard or whatever the thing was called. Any number of cards create tokens in this set, and this makes you sacrifice a real card. In Limited, that matters, but it matters in Standard a lot. It matters in Standard so much, too. So I like this. Again, if you haven't seen the transform side, here it is. This is one of those cards that does everything. It threatens to transform the turn after it comes into play a lot of the time, and that basically means it threatens to end the game. It really does. So this is right up there with Elishnorn in terms of the most powerful cards in the set to me. I'm going to give this a 3.5. Something like that. Did I give Elishnorn a 3.5? I basically am going to give this the same score. So, is it mythic or rare? This is a mythic. All the Praetors are mythic. Every single one of them. But let's move on to Tenured Oilcaster. This is a 4-mana 2/4 menace that does stuff. I don't like this card that much. Just period. I'm going to give it a 1.25. Terror of Tawashi is next. This is Tawashi. This is a 4-mana 4/3. I think this is a jumpstart card. I'm pretty sure, so I don't really want to evaluate it for limited too much, which means I'm going to give this card like a 1.75. He looks cool, but there's just a million better, more reliable, especially ways to reanimate dudes. There just are. So let's move on to Traumatic Revelation. Art's the coolest part of this card, but it is a neat little discard effect. And if you whiff on it, you don't whiff on it, which I really like. There's some discard effects you can whiff on, and you have wasted your turn 2 and a card, which is worse than wasting a turn in some situations. So, even these discard spells never totally whiff because you at least get to see your opponent's hand. That information's important. But, not being able to pull a card sucks. So Incubate 3 when you can't is great. Like literally great, but I still think the card is only like a 2.5, something like that. Unseal the Necropolis is next. 3 mana. Each player mills 3 cards. You return 2 dudes from your graveyard to your hand. Not terrible. Not the best card in the world either. I mean, it's technically card advantage and limited, which is fine. For black, that's fine. Especially at instant speed. Kind of a divination in a way. So, although divination is sorcery speed, so it's got that going for it. So this could be better than it looks in limited. Usually 3 mana things in limited that put 2 cards in your hand, even in black that like return them from your graveyard, are often better than they look. Especially again, these long grindy environments like this one looks to be, but I still can't really give this more than a solid 2. Vanquish the Weak is up next, a reprint, a removal spell, so you'll play every copy that you get. Every single copy that you get. In your limited pool, right? But you're not going to play this in standard. We'll give it a 2.5. Aki's Scrap Chomper is next. We're in red. Oh my God, we're in red. Oh yeah. That's really nice. Taking a drink is really nice. Thanks for your follow, Hungry Hat. By the way, at the end, when we get done here and we leave the YouTube portion of the video, I'm going to say everyone's names who subbed and followed and all that stuff. Can I turn down the alert box? Is that a possibility? Alert box. Properties. Global alert delay. Seconds. Looking for the advanced. Turn it down. There we go. Okay. So it's going to cut down on into my speed run time a little bit. But I do need to stop it with the alert box. You know what I mean? It's a little loud. But if you followed or subbed, I will say your name end of stream. But let's get back to it. With red. Scrap Chomper is a single mana for a 1/1 sack an artifact or land, draw a card, pay 2 mana and tap to do that. That's a lot. 1.25. Drawing cards is great. It is, but 1.25. Axguard Artisan is up next. This dude's a little bit more interesting. A 2 mana 2/1, and whenever you put a counter on it for the first time each turn, you create a treasure token. Not any counter. It's got to be a +1/+1. It would be faster to read these at this point, and not like try to shorten the vernacular and then end up ultimately lengthening it. But either way, this I think is neat too. We've talked about Kimana Faces Kakazan putting counters on this. Now you get a 2 mana 3/2 that made a treasure token. Thundering Raiju puts counters on this, and you get treasure tokens, and all of this could actually be pretty cool. Even the mono red deck needs some extra mana. It needs extra mana to bring them Phoenix chicks back from the yard, needs extra mana to activate Squee out of the graveyard. So it's entirely possible that, especially after rotation, this card is somewhat playable. But even right now, red does not have the best suite of 1-drops, right? Cough button. So, I'm not sure that it's as good as I want it to be, but this card is at least kind of interesting and has some standard applications. So, I'll give it a 2.25. Beamtown Beatstick is a neat little 1 mana equipment right here, right? It's not, I don't think, as good as Sticky Fingers, because it does something very similar to Sticky Fingers, but it does give the creature a boost. That's kind of nice, and it sticks around. Sticky Fingers draws you a card, I think, when the creature dies, which is its way of replacing itself. But if the creature dies at the Beamtown boot stick, The Beamtown Beat Stick. If that creature dies, you just get to put the beat stick on something else. And that's like kind of cool. Might be neat for like 1 mana kind of equipment centric decks, but those are obviously like tier P, will they move up to tier O because of this card? Maybe. So I can't really like give this card a lot of praise. So I'm just going to give it like a 2.25, but I think it's like halfway decent. Blood Feather Phoenix, baby. This is the Phoenix of the set, and it's one of the better Phoenixes to my mind that we've seen in a good long time, man. I like this thing a good bit. So I'm going to go ahead and give Phoenix like a 3.25. I think it's way up there. I think it could see modern play. I really do. Definitely, potentially, definitely maybe Pioneer play and even standard play if we get the right burn spells. And we already have plenty. Play with fire, lightning strike, all that. But we also just got the Convoke one, Stoke the Flames. It's a reprint. That card is really good. So like standard burn could be on the menu, boys. But let's move on to Burning Sun's Fury. Definitely one of my sleeper picks for the set, guys. Just 2 mana, instant speed, Convoke. 2 of your guys get +2/+0, gain haste till EOT. This is good. This is a good card. I've already talked about Blades of Velis Vel. It's a really obscure card, or at least I think it is. There may be some combos with it. It's a relatively obscure card that I won a bunch of games with back in the day with Elementals in Lorwyn block. And this is just a much better version of this. You can cast it for free, and the dudes get haste rather than all creature types. Like, that's just much. This is a much upgraded version of a card that I've really liked in the past. So I'm going to give this like a 2.5, which doesn't sound super high. But remember, I'm including kind of standard play in this. So, like, not super standard playable. But 2.5 is like just on the brink. It is right there to where like this could see some sparing, very, very sparing, super narrow play in the right deck. But I think there could be aggro decks that want a card like this. I've seen it in the past. It's 4 damage. It's 4 damage at instant speed out of nowhere for effectively free. And it triggers all of your spell slingers. You know what I mean? So let's try it. Chandra Hope's Beacon is a 6. Man, a Planeswalker with a decent passive. Right? I mean, it copies all your instants and sorceries. 6 mana is a lot to pay for this, but you also get a Planeswalker. It's pretty good, The +1 synergizes pretty well with the passive and all that. But it being a 6 mana Planeswalker, I don't love. The thing I do love is that it goes up to 7 the turn that you play it. So sometimes. So that's not bad. If you can play it and then +2 it and like lightning strike a guy off the table, you probably protected her enough to where she'll stick around, right? I like the Chandra. I'm still not super sure how strong she is, but I will give her a solid 3 and see if she goes like a 1/4 of a point up or down from there once the season starts. City on Fire, baby. This City on Fire. It's a Sweeney Todd reference out of nowhere. This is 8 mana for a Fiery Emancipation with Convoke. It deals your red stuff, really not even your red stuff, just stuff you control deals triple damage to everything. That's a good card. 8 mana is a lot, but when I say constructed play, I kind of also mean, commander play. And this is one of the better commander cards in the entire set. I don't know if you can play this card in limited. If you can get it on the table, then congratulations, you probably won the game. In standard, it, again, going to be really hard to play, and it's probably win more. I just don't think you need to play this card. But in Commander, it's almost certainly going to find a home, so I'm going to give this card a 2.75 on the strength of 1 format alone. Let's move on to Coming In Hot. This is a spell we've seen a bunch, but this time it's Scries. Little combat trick, +1/+0 first strike, instant speed, 1 mana. Scry 1. It's not terrible, but not amazing either. But +1/+0 in first strike is sometimes enough to do it. More than you might think it's enough to do it. It's a combat trick you'll play every now and again, but not too often. We'll give it a 1.5. Crag Smasher Yeti is the land cycling thing in red, and it's a big old guy. 6 mana, 4/2. Why? Why does my 6 mana guy trade with 2-drops? Well, because he has backup 2. Which isn't bad, but I still don't think he's a great dude. I really don't. So I'm just going to give this guy like a 1.752. Itali Primal Conqueror, one of my favorite cards in the whole set. The 7 mana 7/7 Dino with Trample. When he ETBs, you get to cast 2 free cards. If you transform him, he's a Blightsteel Colossus, basically. It's 11/11 Trample Indestructible, does damage in the form of poison counters. All that's just, actually, he doesn't do that. He does the damage and he does the poison counters. So hilarious. But This card I think is sneaky. I haven't heard that many people talking about it, but I think this is actually kind of extremely very strong. Extremely strong. So I'm going to give this card a 3 and just kind of leave it at that. Fearless Scald is up next. This is the double strike backup guy. Not super incredible, but could do some real work in limited where like double strike out of nowhere is good, but is 5 mana worth that? I don't know. I still think I want to play it in limited though, so I'm just going to give this a 2. Furnace Gremlin is up next. This is a decent little mana sink, but not incredible. 2 mana, 1/2 when it dies. Incubate X is equal to its power, and blah, blah. This is probably just like a 1.75, decent 23rd card. Furnace Host Charger is up next. 6 mana, 5/5 haste. Mountain Cyclone 2, not incredible. Although, 5/5 haste is a good thing to have access to, right? But I'm still just going to give this like a 1.75. Furnace Rains is one of the better threaten effects that we've ever seen in our lives. And there's plenty of stuff you can sacrifice the creature to in this set too. So I like the card in terms of, its influence on draft environment, but I'll just give it like a 2.25. These can be decent effects. Hanger Scrounger is up next. This is a 2 mana or 3 mana 2/1 with backup that rummages and stuff. It's not the worst creature in the world, but it also has terrible stats. Even when backed up, it's not got amazing stats. So I will say this kind of rummage effect is great to get to your bomb in limited. So I'll just give this a 2. Harried Artisan is up next. The 3 mana 2/3 haste that transforms into a 3/4 flying haste. It's a solid card, but not incredible. I'll give it a 1.75, maybe a 2. Into the Fire is the red sweeper of this set that deals 2 damage to creatures, planeswalkers, and battles. But you can also, if you feel like it, kind of wheel yourself. You can go wheel yourself. What great art that is, by the way. But in any case, obviously this is solid. I'm going to give it a 3 because I don't know how standard playable it is. I really don't. But it's always going to have something to do. 9 times out of 10, it's going to have something to do. But I think you're just going to play Brotherhood's End instead if you want a 3 mana sweeper in red. So it can't be that great. Could be more of a 2.75 than a 3. But we'll move on to Invasion of Kaldheim. This is a decent invasion, but probably not incredible. I don't love the front half that wheels, but the back half is Seismic Assault, which I really, really like a lot. And it's Seismic Assault that kind of draws cards too. So I want to like it. It looks like a lot of fun, but I really can't spikily. If I really want to objectively analyze the card, it probably isn't more than like a 2, to be honest. Invasion of Karsus is next. This is the battle that's a sweeper for 4 mana. And then if you turn it over, it's a 4/4 ward, pay 2 life, and then does damage to your opponents when it gutter snipes when you cast spells. Which is a fine card. And I like that it's a sweeper on the top half. But at the same time, I'm not going to give this more than like a 2.5. Something like that. Again, and when I say 2.5 for like little removal spells and limited, remember kind of different metrics. Like when I say I'm evaluating this card for standard, it's a 2.5. That's a little bit different than like a 2.5 that's a removal spell unlimited. You know what I mean? So there are very minor differences and there's some nuance between those things, but I really hope you get what I'm saying. I'm very tired and borderline delirious, but we're already halfway through red, which is kind of surprising. Look at Invasion of Mercadia next. This is the thing that's a Tormenting Voice on the front half. And on the back half, it's a 3/3 that can tap to discard a card and make 2 1/1s that get +1/+0 and haste until end of turn. The text just keeps going on this card. I don't hate this either. I really don't. Like the front half is a card you might play regardless. And if you can't attack it down, you get a pretty decent dude, But still not that impressive when it really all boils down to it, right? It might do a lot of stuff, but, we've got plenty of cards in standard that do a lot of stuff. So I'm just going to give this a 2.5, which is actually a little higher than I want to give it. I feel generous right now. Invasion of Regatha is the 3 mana 4 damage to a thing, And if you flip it over, it has prowess. And it also kind of gutter snipes too. If a non-creature source you control would deal damage to a creature, battle, or opponent, deals that much damage +2. So turn your Play with Fires into 4 damage, your Lightning Strikes into Lava Axes. It's all good. But, you have to it's 5 to flip the stupid thing over. So you better have like more than enough spells in your hand to make up for the difference that it took to hit this and not your opponent's face with your burn spells. But either way, this is 3 mana for 4 damage to, an opponent. So that's bad. But it is burn that I like. You know, if you go play with fire, lightning strike, this stoke the flames. It's like you've got the workings of a decent burn deck. So I like the card's existence, but I'm really not going to give it more than like a 1.75. Invasion of Tarkir is up next. Which one are you? Reveal any number of dragon cards. Oh yeah, you're the Scorching Dragon Fire, but it's sorcery speed. And then you flip over into this guy. Whenever a dragon you control attacks, it deals 2 damage to any target. Neat little dude, but obviously unbelievably narrow. But it's still a removal spell for the dragons decks. They'll definitely play in Commander every time. It's maybe one of the more played cards from this set in Commander, if only because like it goes in Dragon, you know, it goes in Niv Mizzet Reborn, it goes in Tiamat, it goes in decks with dragons in them in Commander like every time. So decent card there, but I'm not going to give it more than like a 2.5. Karsus Death Guard is next. 3 mana for a 4/3 defender. If its power is 5 or greater, it can attack as though it didn't have defender. It's not a super great card, but I do like that you can pay this for 3 into, you know, Kumana faces Kakazan, put a counter on it, and you have a 3 mana 5/4. You know, could be worse, but I just think you have more reliable options in standard at the 3-drop slot, so I'm just going to give this like a 1.5. Kenra Spell Speeder is next. This is one of the other good like transform dudes in the set. Even there's not a whole lot of them at lower rarities, but this is one of them. He's the 2 mana 2/2 Trample Prowess. If you flip him over, he has Trample, Ward 2, and Prowess, which is just, I love seeing a creature with Prowess. I'm gonna give this guy a 2.5. Again, being generous here, he's probably more of a 2.25, but this is probably the best like lower rarity transform dude in the whole set. Lithomantic Barrage is next. This is the color hoser in red. It can't be countered. It deals 5 damage to a whiter blue creature or planeswalker, or 1 damage to something else. That's seriously not great. It's just not a great card. But because of its sideboard ability, I think I have to give it like a 2.5. Marauding Dreadship is next. This is a 3 mana 4/1 haste that enters the battlefield and incubates 2. It crews for 2. I like this card more than I should. To the point where I think if it was just slightly, like a tick better, it could be like potentially standard playable. It's a better card than it looks like, but not great. I mean, it doesn't trample, your opponent blocks it with an X1 and it dies. That sucks, but I do like the built-in crewability of this card a little bit. I think I've been rating this card slightly too highly all season, to be honest. I'm just going to give it a 1.75. Mirren Bane Splitter is up next. Is this the best equipment? At least the best lower rarity equipment in the whole set. This is just a single red mana for a Bone Splitter, right? Equipped creature gets +2/+0, but this has flash, and it attaches automatically to a dude. But it equips for 3. That's the only downside compared to Bone Splitter, and the mana cost. I mean, they both cost 1, but you have to be playing red to play this. Nevertheless, I think this is a fine card. I really do. If you were playing Eater of Virtue in your equipments deck, this is actually, oddly, probably better than Eater of Virtue. It has flash and it auto attaches, which, you know, that's probably better than Eater. The best part about Eater of Virtue is +2/+0 at a relatively low cost, and this does that and more. You know what I mean? So I like this a good bit. Honestly, I'm gonna give this a 2.75. I mean, I really think it's a very, very good equipment. I really do. But we'll move on to Nahiri's Warcrafting. Another card I want to like, but I don't. Like, Nahiri just gets the shaft. But that's sorcery speed, which is the poopy part. But this can kill a Sheoldred in standard in red, which not every card does. And it also can draw cards. If it kills a Sheoldred, it can't. But if it kills anything smaller, it can technically draw cards. So there's going to be turns where you have 5 mana. You play this, you deal 2xx damage to a thing, and you can kind of draw a card. You know, sometimes you'll draw a lightning strike to kill their other guy. This card is probably at least okay. It's all right, but sorcery speed sucks, man. If this was instant speed, it'd be so much better. And as it is, I'm probably just going to play like, what is it, Rebel Salvo? I forget the name of the card, but there's like a 5 mana instant speed, you know, or 3 mana instant speed, 5 damage to a target already in red. And I think I'd rather have the instant speed than like once in a blue moon cast a spell, because you still have to have the extra mana for it. There has to be something decent. You can get a land. That's kind of good. You can get a land off of this and just play that, and that could be worth it. So maybe it's better than I think, but I'm just going to give it... Let's actually go 2.75 on this. Just because... No, let's go 2.5 because of the sorcery speed. Let's go 2.5 because of sorcery speed. But Ripple Flux, thanks for the Prime sub. Onaki Javelineer is next. This is 5 mana for a 5/4 reach that you can tap to deal 2 damage to a player. So one reason I like this is because it has both forms of reach. Every time I say this like aggro card provides reach, I feel like I have to, for people who are new to the game, I have to say like not reach the keyword ability, but reach the gameplay like concept. If you don't know what that is, it's basically the ability to deal the last few damage to the opponent without having to actually deal combat damage to them. And this does both of those things. It reaches and it reaches. And I kind of like that. But it would be a bit of a reach to say this card is good. So I'm just going to give it like a 1.75. Ortheon, Hero of Lava Brink. I believe this is jump startable. So it's not going to be in like the traditional draft experience. We can't really analyze it for that. But this is a sleeper in the purest sense of the word, because a sleeper is often a card that has to wait until rotation or until a combo piece comes in. Very often when we first started using the term sleeper in Magic, it was to denote cards that had to wait a certain amount of time until they were actually relevant. And I think Ortheon has to wait until rotation. This is a super fixed, and by fixed, I don't just mean fixed, I kind of mean neutered, like every way you can use the word fixed version of Fable of the Mirror Breaker. But even a crappy Fable of the Mirror Breaker might be okay, especially considering this one doesn't take a billion turns to flip over and also actually be able to use. This one doesn't give your opponent like 6 turns to find an answer to it. I'm being hyperbolic, but this one does give your opponent 1 turn to find an answer to it. That's a lot fewer than 4. So it could be a fine card. It really could. But let's look at Strictly Better Dueling Rapier, the Bane Splitter. I thought about Dueling Rapier too, and I really like Dueling Rapier. But let's move on to Pyretic Prankster. This is a 2 mana 2/1 devil that you can transform into this guy, a 3/2 glistening goremonger. When he dies, everyone sacrifices an artifact or creature. This is Deece, right? This is halfway Deece. The transform card cost isn't too high. In limited, this is all limited. The it's not the most embarrassing stat line in the world. And if it does transform and then like trade in combat, which it will, it'll trade in combat and then make them sack something else. I think it's, again, like bread and butter, sort of decent transform guy, but I'm not going to give it any more than a 2. Row's Reinforcements is next. This is dragon fodder with crappier creature types a lot of the time, but somebody pointed out in the comments section, I said this was mostly worse dragon fodder, and they did point out this set has a lot of Convoke, and this can decrease both blue and red cost in the casting cost of Convoke spells, and that might matter a lot in limited, but I'll always take 2 mana, make 2 1/1s. I will always take that. It's a fine card. What do we rate it as? I'm not too sure. It's probably like a 2.5. These cards like Gather the Townsfolk, Join the Dance, Dragon Fodder, stuff like this, 2.5. Ramosian Greatsword is a crap equipment. It is not very good. I know it convokes. I get that it convokes. Still a garbo equipment. I'm going to give this a 1.25. Rampaging Raptor is the fixed questing beast, I guess. Side questing beast, if you will. So that's good. I'm going to give this card a 3 or 3.25. 3. Let's give it a 3. Red Cap Heel Slasher is up next. The 4 mana 2/3 backup 1 first strike. It's not very good. We'll give it a 1.5. 1.25. Scrappy Bruiser is a big old raccoon, but that's just about all he actually does. I mean, he does some cool stuff, don't get me wrong, but I just think there's probably better ways to use your 4-drop slots in limited here. So I'm going to give him a 1.25 as well. Searing Barb is up next. This is 2 damage to a target, and that target can't block this turn. Incubate 1 for 3 mana. I wish this were not sorcery speed. Why is it sorcery speed? But one way or the other, it's removal and limited. It costs too much mana and it's sorcery speed. So I'm going to bump it down to 2.25, but it's still somewhat playable, especially considering it's got a bunch of extra text on it too. Shatter the Source is too much mana, even with Convoke. This is just way too much mana, but again, it's still removal at common, so you'll play at least one of them in your limited deck. But I got to give this like a 2.25. Shivan Branch Burner is next. 7 mana, 5 and 2 red for a 4/4 Convoke. Flying Haste. It ain't too bad, but it ain't too great either. I'll give it a 2. Stoke the Flames is next, baby. The reprint. 4 mana, Convoke. 4 damage to any target. That's just a solid, simple, clean, good little burn spell that's going to end a lot of games over the next 2 years, I can promise you. You might get sick of it, or you might love it. Soak the Flames is a great magic card. It's just a wonderful magic card. It really is. So I can't wait to play you again. Standard burn might be real once more without lightning bolt. I didn't know if we'd ever actually get there again, but it might happen because of the power of this card. So it doesn't kill Shieldred, but now at this point, you could make the argument that we've got enough red burn in standard to just go over the top and kill the Shieldred player by hitting them in the face. They shouldn't get too many turns to gain life. You know what I mean? But one way or the other, Stoke the Flames is a phenomenal magic card. We've seen that before. We'll see it again right now. And I'm going to give this card a 3.25. I think it's very good. Thrashing Frontliner is up next. 2 mana for a 2/2 trample. When it attacks a battle, it gets +1/+1 till EFT. That's not the worst thing in the world, but it's, again, not great. You might play this in limited. 2 mana 2/2 trample is like fine. Red stats, especially for, a red 2-drop. It could be way worse. So I wouldn't mind playing this as a 23rd card. I'll give it a 2. Trailblazing Historian is a 2 mana 1/3 with haste, and you can tap it to give another dude haste. That's kind of cool. I'll give this guy a 2.5. I'll do that. I shouldn't, but I'll give him a 2.5. Urabrask is up next. Probably the last red card that remains to be seen. But yeah, Urabrask. This isn't the worst Praetor. It's probably right in the middle in terms of how good the Praetors are. So I think I gave Shieldred and Elish Norn 3.5s. I'll give this a 3.25. I still think this is a wonderfully just almost broken magic card. Look at everything it does. Look at all it makes mana. It does damage. It transforms for relatively cheap if you can rip off some spells, right? It's got decent body for the cost, especially when you factor in the keyword ability. It sweeps. It ramps again. It makes mana 2 ways on, one way on each side. And it's card advantage for big reds. So just like, and by the way, this is neat because you'll flip it over. When you get to this, you'll flip it over. You'll be able to cast spells from any graveyard, by the way. That's kind of cool. And Urabrask will help you get the mana to play those spells. That's pretty neat. I do like Brasky. So Boris Brasky, I'm going to have to give him that 3.25. I think he's good. I'm also going to have to let Ziggy out. There are 4 more red cards. Let me get through red and we'll let you out. But Volcanic Spite is just Fire Prophecy, but better. So I'm going to give this a 2.75. Voldaren Thrillseeker is one of my favorite red cards, like in the whole set. I've talked too much about this card already, so I'm not going to go on too long. I'm just going to, what do I give one of my favorite cards in the set? A 2.75, sure. War Train Slasher is just not the best card, but it does double its power when it attacks a battle, so something. Wish it had Trample and not Menace, but that might be broken when it comes to busting up battles in limited, but one way or the other, I'm still going to give this a pretty high score. If it attacks a battle, it may not have that trample, but your opponent has to double block it and both of their creatures probably die, like 89% of the time, or some very specific figure. But either way, it's a fine card, but not great. I will give this a 2, mostly on the strength of limited play. Rin's Resolve is Reckless Impulse. That's an intensely good magic card. I will give it a 3.25. So let's move on to green after I let Ziggy out and take a little sippy. We are almost there, everybody. I'll be right back. I'm almost there. I'm almost there. People gonna come from everywhere, and I'm almost there. We're in green, everybody. Ancient Imperiosaur. I hope that I don't somehow, YouTube doesn't take forever with the checks because I just sang a Disney song. Not the checks like money, but like they do a check on your video to see if it's ad friendly or has copyright content when you upload it. And I really hope I didn't sound exactly like Tiana there. I can't sing that pretty, can I? Anyway, let's move on to green. Ancient Imperiosaur is next. 7 mana for a 6/6 Convoke Trample Ward 2 when it ETBs. It gets 2 +1/+1 counters for each dude that convoked it. Every time I read it, I like it. If you pay 5 mana for this by tapping 2 guys, you have a 10/10 Trample Ward 2. Let's kind of go a little bit, I like this card too much. Too much for my own good. I don't think it's great. I think it's Timmy bait, and I'm being a Timmy. I am being the Timmy. I am taking the cheese. The trap is falling on me right now. I'm screwed, but I will still call this card a 2.75. Arachnoid Adaptation is next. It's not great. It's just the combat trick in green of the set. There's a couple of them, but this is just 1 mana for +2/+2 and some other things. It's whatever, 1.5. Atrax's Fall is next. Now, I do want to be clear. I do believe that if you target a battle your opponent is protecting with this card, it does not flip. You have to get the counters off of it, which involve dealing damage to it. Or cards like that, like the black 3-drop at sorcery speed that we saw that takes 5 counters off of a permanent. That's how you flip a battle. I'm pretty sure targeting a battle with this doesn't flip it over. That'd be way too easy. But one way or the other, I still think that this is probably a main deckable card in limited, 2.5. Blighted Burgeoning up next, 3 mana for this thing. You know, it's 3 mana, attaches to a land, and it does something extra besides just ramping you. In this case, it incubates too. I like getting a body with this ability, even though it doesn't really put a body on the table. I would like if it just... Can I get one of these, but it gives me like a 1/1? I might play that. I have to pay more mana for the incubate too. And I'm not going to pay the more mana for the incubate. Like, I'm not going to pay the 2 mana to flip over the token because it's a ramp deck. I'm doing stuff with my mana, but maybe you could argue it's a ramp deck. I have extra mana, so I'm more likely to flip the token in that case. But I don't love these 3 mana staple it to a land and ramp things in limited usually, and I honestly don't love them in standard. There's 3 mana is a bit much for this ability 9 times out of 10, so I'm going to give this a 1.5. There was a time I would have given it a 1.75. Not anymore. Bonded Herd Beast is up next. A 5 mana 4/5 that you can transform into a 7/5 menace. Super normal magic card, right? The thing I like about this is that if you can play it, you can transform it next turn, right? But if you can play it, you can probably transform it. And that's at least noteworthy, right? But I still am not like the hugest fan of this. I'm going to give it a 1.5. Chomping Kavu next. 4 mana 3/3 backup 1. Can't be blocked by creatures power 2 or less. That's, again, just the most normal magic card I've ever seen. But a 4 mana 4/4 with an extra ability is at least decent limited. I'll give it a 2. Converter Beast is up next. I hate this guy. He's the 4 mana 0/1 that incubates 5 when he ETBs. I just cannot stand this dude. He's like the biggest incubate in the set. And you're supposed to be like, oh, he gives you 2 bodies for 4 mana. But no, he gives you 2 bodies for 6 mana. He gives you a 5/5 and a 0/1 for 6 mana. It's not that great. So I'm just going to give this like a 1.75. Copper Host Crusher is next. This is an 8 mana. It doesn't convoke, but it's 8 mana for an 8/8 trample hexproof. I want to build like $5 Reanimator. I want to do 5 for 5 again. Which we haven't done in forever. I'd really like to bring that series back. But if we do 5 for 5 this season, do not be surprised if you see like green-black Reanimator where this guy is the reanimation target. I actually think he's pretty decent, but I can't give him more than like a 2.25. And that's a stretch. Cosmic Hunger is up next. Strictly Better Rabid Bite. It's actually a Strictly Better Master's Rebuke, which was already a Strictly Better Rabid Bite. So I'm going to give this card a 2.75. I think it's actually like 2.5. The same as an unconditional removal spell, right? And I don't even know if it deserves that, but the fact that it can hit battles, big deal too. So yeah. People kept asking if Atrax's Fall kills battles. This does. This is 2 mana to kill a battle in green. So as long as you got a dude out most of the time. Crystal Carapace is up next. Crystal Carapace is up next. 4 mana for an aura. +3/+3 ward 2, cycling 2. The fact this cycles makes it a little better, but I just still don't love stuff like this. The cool thing is it's an aura that gives the creature ward. You might still get blown out while it's on the stack, but it costs them more mana to blow your guy up once it's actually on there. That mitigates the aura problem a little bit, but still, your opponent will just cast the removal spell for extra mana and you will get 2 for 1. So I'm not sure how much I love it. I'll give it a 1.75. Deeproot Wavefinder up next. The 2 mana 1/3 that could technically ramp a little bit, but the more I look at this card, the less I like it. Really though. I want to like it, but I don't love it. I really don't. And I'm not actually sure how great it is, despite the fact that I want to play it in like stick fingers and stuff, but dealing combat damage, especially if you're on the draw, the card just looks really stinky, but dealing combat damage is a lot to ask. So I want the card to be good, but the more I look at it, the more doubts I have. So I'm just going to give it a 2.5. Doomscar Warrior is next. Guy looks kind of nice, right? Nice. A 4-mana, 4-power dude with backup 1 and trample, so he can be a 5-power dude. Or he can just make a creature trample when he comes into play, and also have this ability. When the creature deals combat damage to a player or battle, look at that many cards from the top of your library, reveal a creature or a land from among them, put it into your hand, the rest go on the bottom in a random order. So a 4-mana kind of 5-power guy that tramples and draws cards seems good, but I just think there's better options at 4-dropping green. But in a vacuum, I'm still going to give this guy a 2.75. He looks bulk rarey, but he's not actually that bad. He has trample, so he facilitates his own ability, you know. Sometimes you'll be able to draw a card off this guy the turn he comes into play, even though he didn't attack. But then next turn, you'll draw another card off of him. It's not that bad. But we'll move on to Fairgrounds Trumpeter. A 3-mana 2/2 at the beginning of each end step. If a +1/+1 counter was put on a permanent under your control this turn, then Trumpeter gets a +1/+1 counter. You could argue this is a pretty easy 3-mana 3/3. I still hate the card. I hate that it's basically a vanilla 2/2 until you can facilitate it with something. And then it's a 3/3, and that might not be for another turn. You have much less control over that in a format like Limited, which is where you're going to see the card. This is, to my mind, I could be wrong on this because maybe it grows to 5/5 over the course of the game. I think that might be harder than it looks. You can do stuff with backup. Backup's very good with this, don't get me wrong. But I still just am livid in 2023 at the idea of a 3-mana 2/2 that doesn't do anything until you do more stuff. That's crazy to me in a set like this. So I hesitate to call it one of the worst cards in the set, period, but it kind of is a little bit. So I'm going to give this card a 1.25. Fertilid's Favor is up next. This is 4 mana for an instant speed. Search your library for a basic land, battlefield tap, shuffle, and then a creature gets +2 or 2 +1/+1 counters. You can also put that on an artifact if you want to put it on a vehicle. That's not terrible, but 4 mana is too much for this even at instant speed. You know, I was just fussing about how I don't want to get 1 land for 3 mana. I really don't want to get 1 land for 4 mana, even if it's an instant. This could body people during combat, though, and I want to point that out, but a combat trick that ramps still, to me, just isn't worth the 4 whole mana. I would have paid 1 green, but maybe not 3 and a green. Have I rated this yet? 1.5. Glistening Dawn is up next. For some reason, I thought this cost 5 mana during previous season. It costs 4, but it's still not great. You incubate X twice, X the number of lands you control. So you'll have to pay 8 mana to get the full value out of this. And I don't like it. I just don't much care for it. I think it's bulk rare. Actually, I think it might be Jumpstart. Am I wrong? It might be. But even if it's one or the other, it's bulk rare. It looks kind of cool, but I don't see this getting past, a 2.25, something like that. But maybe I'm wrong. But I doubt it. It just doesn't look like a super impressive card. Notbald Hermit is up next. A 4-mana 4/4 in its own right that transforms into a 5/5 that also makes another dude 5/5 when it attacks. This is pretty good. 4-mana 4/4 in Limited is decent stats, regardless, no matter what. You'll play that all day. And then making it a 5/5 that effectively attacks for 10 when it attacks is sure. That's some power for Simic. Decent card for Limited. I'll give it a 2.25. Herbology Instructor I like. This is my other favorite lower rarity flip dude in the set. 2 mana for a 1/3. When he enters the battlefield, gain 3. For 1,000,000 mana, he flips into a guy that basically zaps a dude when he comes into play. Decent, limited, playable guy. Decent. Not amazing, but decent. I'll give him a 2.25. He's effectively a removal spell on a body that costs a lot of work to get to. Too much work. 7 mana is a lot. Even 6 mana is a lot. But again, slow, plodding games. And by the time you flip this over, you'll almost certainly have a target. It might not be their best creature, but you'll have a target for it. We'll move on to Invasion of Ikoria. This is one of the ones that everyone's been talking about. It's got a decent little card draw, or really Genesis Ultimatum. Is that the one? Genesis Ultimatum is not right. Finale of Devastation. That's the one I'm thinking of. Or just Green Sun Zenith on the front half. And the back half is an 8/8 reach that lets your dudes become like Thorn Elementals, which is really neat. Again, I'm thinking it might be Timmy Bait. 6 mana is 6 defense is a freaking lot. It's so much, but you could argue that this is one of the ones that if you can attack it down, you basically win the game the next turn, right? If this guy's still out, you probably win if you have any number of creatures out. But the turn before that, you had enough creatures to attack this down for 6 and flip it over. That should probably just be going to your opponent's head, honestly. But I don't know. The front half of it is so decent that it could see some play. I'm going to give this card a 3. Invasion of Ixalan. This one, look at the top 5 cards of your library, reveal a permanent. Wait, yeah, this is the one I was thinking Invasion of Ikoria was at first. This is the one that draws the best permanent from the top 5. And then on the back half, you get this 4/3 trample whenever you cast a spell, it gains indestructible. Neat card, obviously a pretty neat card. I hate the sorcery speed on these because it's not, especially a card like this, just isn't as good as you think it is when you must play it on your turn. That said, the dig is pretty big, and if you ever do flip it over, the fact that you can protect it pretty easily is good. That's gravy and all that, but I'm not going to give the card more than like a 2.75. Let's give the card a 2.6. That sounds right. Invasion of Miraganda is up next. This one is crappy, right? Whenever Invasion of Miraganda enters the battlefield, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control. Then it fights. Okay, so it's a 5 mana +1/+1 and fight. When you flip it over, it becomes this guy. At the beginning of combat on your turn, another target creature gets +2/+2 and loses all abilities until end of turn. So 5 mana 4/4. It costs 6 to flip over. It does fight a thing. Not the worst thing in the world, but I don't know. I probably still can't give this more than like a 2, even though it's technically a removal spell. It's because it costs so much mana. It's always sorcery speed. I don't know. I don't love it. Invasion of Chandalar. This is the one, yeah, you return 3 permanent cards from your graveyard to your hand. And then this Leyline Surge, when you attack it down, beginning of your upkeep, put a permanent card from your hand on the battlefield. Just the wildest text. Card's probably not actually that great in limited, though, when you think about it. So there's that, but it is maybe good in constructed and especially decent, I think, in Commander. Could be, but one way or the other. I think this is probably like a 2.5, you know, like not insanely powerful or anything, but playable in certain spots. I do think, I keep like wiping my nose, but I do think, like massive allergies today, but I do think this is like playable in very narrow kind of decks. So I'll give it a 2.5. Invasion of Zendikar is up next. This is the one where you search your library for 2 basic lands and put them into play at 4 mana. And then it flips over into a 4/4 Vigilance Haste. And it's a land and it adds mana of any color when you tap it. It's a lot of stuff. This is actually pretty good. You know, I don't think Explosive Vegetation is the worst card in the world. That's just 4 mana, ramp 2 lands. And it's seen play before. It's a decent ramp card. So this is just that card, but like way better. Just extremely much better because it technically comes with a potential haste body on it. And I love that. That ramps you even more if that's what you need. So I actually really kind of like this battle. It doesn't cost much to attack down either. Like the lowest any battle costs. A few are tied for the lowest, but you get my point. So I'm going to actually give this card like a 2.75. I think it might be close to or right on the level. Iridescent Blade Master is next. 2 mana for a 2/2 that you can pump. Not a very good card. It's fine. I mean, it's a curve filler. 23rd creature that also has a mana sink on it. But mana sinks are not as necessary in this set as they would normally be, right? Because your mana sink is transform or make Incubator token into a dude. So I'm not sure you have all the extra mana for this, but one way or the other, it's a normal magic card. I give it a 1.5. Kami of Whispered Hopes is up next. I like this dude, man. A 3 mana 1/1, but it kind of like what? Hardened Scales or like Winding Constrictors? It Winding Constrictors. If 1 or more +1/+1 counters we put on a permanent you control, that many +1/+1/+1 counters I put on the permanent instead. You can also tap it for X of any color where X is its power. That's kind of disgusting, isn't it? That like it's more mana than a Winding Constrictor, which probably makes it bad, but I'm pretty sure that's the exact same text as Winding Constrictor right there. So I'm going to give this a 2.5. Something like that. I've never heard anybody mention this card, like all during spoiler season. I think it's actually pretty sick. Overgrown Pest is a 3 mana 2/2, but at least when it ETBs, you get a card. That's pretty good. That's pretty okay. It has to be land or double face, so it's like basically only limited playable, right? But I'll still give this a 2.25. Ozolith the Shattered Spire. This is yet another like, you know, Hardened Scalesy, like Winding Constrictor kind of card. It just costs less mana and it's a lot harder to remove, so it's just better. I'm going to give this card a 3, like a straight up 3. I think if nothing else, it's very, very extremely Commander playable to the point where like I want to give this card a 3.5, but it's just kind of okay in other formats. I don't think you want to waste your turn 2 spending all your mana to play this and not actually put like Power Toughness or like an extremely important thing on the table. This is all set up, you know, it requires more cards to do things for it, to pay it off. And that doesn't mean it's bad or anything. It's just something you have to consider, right? So I'm going to give this card probably just a straight up 3, I would say. But again, mostly that's on the strength of Commander. But we've seen cards like this do very well in Pioneer, Historic, and even other formats before. So it could be way better than I think. But let's move on to Placid Rottentail. Just 1 mana for a 1/1 Vigilance that does stuff out of your graveyard. It puts counters on creatures when you pay 3 mana. This is just fine. I don't know if it's enough to get me to play a 1-drop in my limited deck, but there's plenty of stuff that mills in this set. It's kind of a sub-theme. So if this does end up in your yard, it ends up being, you know, not a combat trick because you can only play it as a sorcery, which sucks. But, you know, an extra power on your dudes, which is not bad. Plus, it's just got Vigilance slapped on so it can convoke stuff. It's not terrible, but I'm still pretty sure I'm not playing this 1-drop in my limited deck most of the time. So I'm going to give it a 1.25. Polukranos Reborn is up next, kids. Watch out. Grab your butts. This is 3 green mana for a 4/5 legendary Hydra with reach. Now, if that weren't enough, which it kind of is, you can transform it for 6 in a Phyrexian white. And then it becomes Wormcoil Engine. There's a 6/6 reach lifelink, and if it ever dies, you get a 3/3 with reach and a 3/3 with lifelink. You don't get Death Touch like you do with Wormcoil. That kind of sucks, but I'll still take this. 3 mana is nothing for a 4/5 reach. That's better stats technically than like Old Growth Troll or Bloated Contaminator or any of these. You know, what was the guy in Throne of Eldraine that cost 3 green mana? He was a 4/4 trample and like everyone played him. He was awesome. He didn't see all the play in the world, but he was in Stompy forever. This guy does not trample, which is a much better ability than reach, mark my words, but it's still 3 mana for a 4/5 body with a keyword ability that just gets better. There's absolutely no downside to the card and nothing but upside. If you can transform him and your opponent deals with him, though, you have even more dudes. This dude just keeps making bodies. Like, this guy's sexy. Like, Yorvo was his name. Thank you, chat. Thank you, Deuce. You're awesome. And Nuclear Warrior, you got it as well. Yeah, I mean, we've seen all these 3 mana 4/4s, and they're great cards, you know? So 3 mana 4/5 is pretty stock. Yeah, I'm going to give him a 3.25. This is just a good card, just in terms of rate for what you're getting, you know? Portent Tracker is up next. 2 mana for a 1/1 that untaps lands, but you can also remove counters or put counters on battles, depending on who controls them. This guy's good. Good. I mean, he untaps Cradle and Nykthos and stuff like that, but in Standard, he untaps, you know, you play Wrenn and Realmbreaker on turn 3, make a land a creature, and untap that land with this guy. We saw Jor-El. That's going to be an Aftershock, and that somebody got me the other day because I was like, dude, you can slam Jor-El on 4 and then attack for like 7 if that many cards are in your hand with one of your lands. And somebody in the comment section was like, oh, you can't do that because all your lands are tapped down. Well, what if you have this guy? You can Jor-El on turn 4, and then depending on the amount of cards in your hand, you can just make one of your lands, untap your land with this guy. That land becomes like a 5/5 flyer, swings over, draws a card. Feels good. So like this dude has stuff to do in Standard, and he has stuff to do in Commander too, because people tend to like dudes that untap lands, especially when they're only 2 mana. It's not Arbor Elf or whatever, the 1 mana guy untap target land. He's not that guy, but people do tend to untap lands, love untapping lands. So I'm going to actually give this guy like a 2.75. I almost said 3, but this dude's good. But we'll move on to Ravenous Sailback. 5 mana. This guy can destroy an artifact or enchantment or gain haste till end of turn when he comes into play. It's not bad. Not a terrible stretch of things, but still just going to give him a 2. Ruin's Recluse is a 2 mana 1/1 reach death touch that can get counters. Again, I'm not sure how much you really need this kind of mana sink in a set like this with all these transform guys and incubator tokens, but I'll take a 2 mana 1/1 death touch, especially one with reach in a set with all these wind drakes and stuff. You know, you're trading up with a 3-drop no matter what with the Recluse, right? But regardless, this can trade up with a lot of 5 and 6 drops and stuff too in the set. Not a whole lot of first strike flyers in the set either. There is like the new Bane Slayer, but there really aren't a whole lot. So this dude can block and kill damn near everything in this entire set. So I like Ruin's Recluse. I'm going to give this guy a 2.25. Sandstalker Moloch is up next. The blue or black color hosing thing. This, unlike a lot of these other ones, except for the white one, I actually think is possibly main deckable. There's probably things you could be playing at 3 mana that are just better than this in your like green stompy deck. But I love that it has flash. I love this card has flash and it's 4 power. Like if nothing else, you flash it in, you kill a guy. You flash it in EOT and you're attacking for 4 damage your opponent didn't know about. So I like this dude, but especially against blue and black, he's obviously at his best. Great sideboard card, probably not main deckable, but aside from the white one, the closest to main deckable of this whole cycle. So I'm going to give this a 2.5. Seed of Hope is next. I sneakily like this card like more than I should. It's just a single green mana for an instant. Mill 2, put a permanent card from among those cards into your hand, gain 2 life. That's all it does. Kind of mill 2, draw a card, gain 2. At instant speed for the second lowest amount of mana imaginable. Not bad. I don't know if it's quite enough value, but I'm still going to give the card like a 2.25, and that's mostly on a constructed rating. I don't think you play this card in limited, just for the record. Serpent Blade Assailant is 3 mana. 3 mana for a 2/1 backup 1 Death Touch guy. Now, a 3 mana Death Touch guy, in my mind, way worse than a 2 mana Death Touch guy. You can still trade with 5 drops, but like part of the point of an early Death Toucher is that you have a 1 or 2 mana guy that trades with 3 and 4 mana guys. A little different in this case, but I'll still take him some of the time. You know what I mean? He's not bad. I'll give him a 1.75. Storm the Seed Core is the overrun effect of this set, basically. And it ain't a bad one, considering it also gives the creatures trample. So that's not terrible. It's not all the power in the world, but I think 4 mana is a pretty good rate for this if you're looking for a finisher. You know, just a top rope elbow drop and limited in your green sort of aggro-y deck. Again, very narrow application. There's a card like this in white that we've seen a million times before. 4 mana, all your guys get +2/+1. Let's go. It's an aggro finisher. This is 2, and I'd rate it similarly. I'd give this about a 2 or a 2.25. Streetwise Negotiator is neat. It's neat. I feel like he's wearing a hat that looks like a toupee. But it's like, is it a toupee? It's not. It's a hat. Why are you wearing a hat? The hat does not look good with this outfit. I'm wasting time. Either way, this is a cool thing in one deck ever, and that's the Arcades deck in Commander, where this might see play, possibly. But even then, most of your creatures in that deck already either assign combat damage equal to their power, or like Arcades is coming out anyway, so do you really need this guy? He might not see the play in the one deck that wants him, but in limited, this is sneakily a 2 mana 3/3. I mean, even in standard, this is effectively a 2 mana 3/3. So it might be a little bit better than it looks, just a tiny little bit, you know. It's kind of a 2 mana 2/2. That's if you back up something. But if he puts the counter on himself, he is a 2 mana 3/3 with no special tricks, you know, no like, oh, this guy has Defender and you got to do this. No. There's 2 mana 3/3. So I have to give him like a 2.5 just based on that one strength alone. You know what I mean? But let's move on to Surican Goreclaw. A lot of people excited about this guy. I don't see it. He's 6 mana for a 6/5 trample. Other dudes you got have trample. And whenever another non-token dude enters the battlefield under your control, it gets a +1/+1 counter and gets haste. So yeah, I get it, but I don't see it. There's a difference. All your dudes have haste and trample and get +1/+1 counter. Seems like a great time. But this guy is 6 mana, and that's a lot. So I'm going to go ahead and stop at, again, this is mostly a constructed rating because you play the card in limited. If this was only a limited list, I would give this card like a 5. It's a ridiculous bomb in limited, but since we have to include other constructed formats, I think it brings it down to like a 2.5 for me. It's really in that. I don't think the card is uncastable or unplayable, but if I'm paying 6 mana in green, I think I'd probably rather have, you know, the thing from Innistrad that like has hex, it's a 4/4 hexproof and it puts counters on your dudes every turn. I think that guy's way better than this. And that guy sees like no play. So I'm sorry, but 2.5. Tandem Takedown is up next. This can take down battles, which is kind of nice. Easy way to do that, but I'm still not 100% sure about this. But if nothing else, it's a removal spell that like 2 of your dudes can like gang up on a guy. You know what I mean? And that's good. That's just good and limited. It's instant speed too. It didn't have to be, and it would still be playable and limited. So I'm going to give this a 2.5, mostly because, again, limited strength. Tangled Skyline is the green version of this card. There's like a global enchantment. Well, I don't want to call them global. There's an enchantment that does stuff for your Phyrexians in every color. This one's 5 mana. Your dudes have reach so as long as they're Phyrexian, and You gain 5 life and incubate 5 when this ETBs. Not bad. I mean, it really isn't. The gain 5 life is technically the worst thing the card does, but it does kind of pay you back for spending your turn on playing this card. You know? So that's kind of good. Makes it to where maybe you'll actually survive the punch in the face you're guaranteed to get after you tap out. And then next turn you can incubate 5. Or you can make your incubate do to 5/5. And, you know, that'll really help. So I don't hate this. I don't in limited, but I'm still not like super in love with it. I'm just going to give it a 1.75. Timberland Ancient is up next. This is 6 mana, 4 and 2 green for a 6/5 Tree Folk with reach and trample and force, cycling 2. Very normal magic card. I'm going to give it a 2. Tribute to the World Tree is next. 3 green mana for an enchantment. Whenever a creature enters the battlefield under your control, draw a card if it's a big boy. Otherwise, make it a big boy. That's pretty good, but again, you have to skip your turn 3 in Standard and every other constructed, competitive format to play this card, which I don't love. I think especially if you're on the draw and you skip your turn 3, your opponent goes into their turn 4, you are in danger of losing the game at that point. It's not a guarantee or anything, but I still think that the amount of time it takes you to get real value off of this card is probably too much in a fast-ish competitive environment. I know Standard is kind of slowish. It's a mid-range environment right now. In a lot of ways. I will say Soldiers and Mono Red are great decks in that environment. And it's not like Mono Black and Grixis even are like the slowest decks in the world, and they're the most popular decks in the format. But, it's a little bit more mid-rangey than we're used to at the moment. And even in a format like that, I'm just really not sure you can skip your turn 3 for this. This is a commander card, but on the strength of it being a commander card, I'm going to give this a 3.25. I think it's that good in that format. I think it's I could almost give this a 4 just on the strength of commander, where I think it's an incredibly strong card. But we'll move on to Vengeance Earth. This is 2 mana, 1 and a green for an instant. A land you control becomes a 4/4 with haste. It's got to be blocked this turn if able. It's only for the one turn that it becomes a 4/4. This card is bad. This is another one of the worst cards in the set. I'll give it a 1. Vorinclex is up next, the Green Praetor. This does an awful lot of things, but less than some of the other ones. I'm going to give this a 3.25 as well. I think it's an extremely strong magic card. I keep having to reiterate that 3.25 is a pretty good score. It's a pretty good score. But at the same time, I'm not sure this replaces other green 5-drops day 1, and I'm honestly not sure that green is even a color in Standard right now. So I'm not sure how much play it sees. In Draft, this is obviously a stupid bomb that you want to play. If you get it, you should play it, I would imagine. Just on the strength of rate. 5 mana 6/6 trample reach is good enough if you do nothing else with this card. But as it is, I think the card is very strong, but not strong enough to warrant like a 4 or anything like that. I think it's right there with Urabrask in terms of power level, even though it does very different things. I'll give it a 3.25. War Historian is next. It has indestructible if it attacks a battle. That's neat. And it's a 3 mana 3/3 reach, which is just right there on rate and has a keyword ability. That's not bad. So again, strength of limited play alone, this gets a 2.25. Wary Thespian is up next. You guys know I like this card. 2 mana for a 3/1 cat druid. When it ETBs or dies, surveil 1. That is a lot of value. ETBs or dies? It almost always trades with, slightly bigger creatures. Like this can trade with 3-drops really easily, both in limited and Standard, which I kind of like. So I'm going to give this card a 2.5. Let's do that. Wildwood Escort is next. I don't like this card very much. 5 mana for a 3/3. When it ETBs, return a creature or battle from your graveyard to your hand. If it would die, exile it instead. So this is a green Gravedigger, basically, for an extra mana, but it also gets an extra point of PT. Now, Gravedigger has typically been a pretty good card in limited throughout the years. It has lost some relevance over the last few years as cards get so good, but usually a body that creates a form of card advantage, draws a creature out of your graveyard. Just get your gas. Is okay. So I'll give this a 2.25. Mostly, again, this is a limited playable card, but not that playable. It looks better than it is, I think. But Ren and Realmbreaker is next. Probably the best green card in the set. This is 3 mana, 1 and 2 green for 4 loyalty. Planeswalker that does everything. It just does all this stuff. But I again have talked at great length about this card. And how I am not as, wacko about it as like everybody else seems to think this is the best card in the top 3 cards in the set at the very least. I'm not convinced on that, but I'm still going to give this card a 3.5, which is basically the highest score I've given a card so far. Tied for like the highest score I've given a card basically all video. Which makes you let you know, like, I do think this is a very good Planeswalker. Again, I just don't love it as much as everybody else does, but I do think it's probably in the top 5 cards in the set. Very likely. Can't believe Dev said Ren sucked. I knew it was coming. Yeah, I think the card is not as good as some people are making it out to be, but I definitely think it's still a very strong Planeswalker. So let's move on to gold, ladies and gentlemen. We're almost there. We are getting there. What's our time right now? Oh, wow. We're doing okay, aren't we? Wow. Okay. Errant and Giada start off the parade of ridiculous gold cards. This is the 3-mana 2/3 that kind of Courser of Crew fixes for flash and flying guys. This is neat. I want to build blue-white flyers in Standard again now. I'm not sure it's the best deck in the world, and I'm not sure this card really helps it that much, but looks okay, I don't hate this. I think it's really interesting as a commander, too, to build decks around and stuff. It might even be better than it looks, but the stat line isn't incredible, even with everything it does. It might whiff the first few turns it's in play and effectively, like, never draw you a card. And that would kind of suck because you're below rate for what you're paying in terms of the body, so... a fair card, if nothing else, but a really interesting one, a cool looking commander, a nice little combination of characters. And it's possible that it's halfway decent in constructed environments too, but I wouldn't hold my breath too much. I'll just give the card a 2.75. So we'll move on to Invasion of New Phyrexia. It's the Azorius battle with X in its cost that gives you all the 2/2s, right? And then it flips over into a substandard version of Teferi. Let's be honest, right? It does get to emblem immediately when it comes into play and give all your knights extra abilities and anthems and stuff. That's cool. The +1 isn't terrible. You get to draw cards and stuff. So it's not terrible. It really isn't. But I do feel like they're being very careful with Teferi because there's 2 versions of Teferi that everyone hated. So the 5-mana Azorius one, the 3-mana Azorius one. So I don't love this card, but I do think as far as making a bunch of dudes that effectively turn into a Planeswalker, that is okay. So I'll give this card a 2.5 or 2.75 more likely, but I don't know this actually ends up seeing play in Standard. I kind of doubt it. Invasion of Xerex is next. You return up to 1 target creature to its owner's hand when it ETBs. And then it turns into Vertex Paladin. That's a star flyer with PT equal to the number of creatures you control. Solid little limited card. It's a little bit of not necessarily removal, but you can manipulate the board state. And again, more likely get in on it, which I do like, but it's still just kind of an average battle. So I'm just going to give it a 2.25, sure. Because it's kind of a removal spell. Marshal of Zhalfir is next. Just for Commander Knights decks and the draft Knights deck that is probably not insanely powerful if I had to guess. In this set, there's an Azorius Knights deck you can draft up that I am not convinced is a very good archetype, but I guess we'll see. Either way, this is a 2-mana Anthem effect with extra text on it that's actually really relevant, so I'm going to give it a 2.5. Halo Forger is up next. This is 3. By the way, I really feel like I have to again tell you the difference between a 2.5 for constructed and a 2.5 for limited. Keep that in mind. But Halo Forger is up next. This is Crapcaster Mage. This is Fapcaster Mage. Well, there has to be a bunch of different names for this, but it does an impression, right? Kind of, a little bit. Not a very good one, but it's trying its little heart out. But one way or the other, you get a decent body with a form of evasion and the ability to cast a removal spell out of your yard or something, which I actually think is kind of slick. So I like this card more than I should. I especially like it in Limited, where I think if it recasts a 2 or 3 mana removal spell and gets you an evasive 3-power guy, goes a long way towards winning the game. So I like this card. Even outside of Limited, I think it's worth experimenting with, but it's probably not quite there. I'll give the card a 2.5. Let me hit the cough button real quick. You can hear me going ooh over here, so hold on. Pollen. Okay, so let's move on to Hidetsugu and Kairi. Okay, we've made it to this card. I like this card a lot, and I think it's probably Standard playable. Almost certainly standard playable. 5 mana is the same as like an Invoke Despair, so I'm not sure you want to play this in the same deck with Invoke Despair, but boy, isn't that tempting to to try to get an Invoke Despair when this thing dies and just like deal 5 to your opponent, cast it for free, deal another 6, or make them sack stuff, draw cards. Like, it is the dream, but I'm not sure I want to live it and play like all the 5 drops in the world in my deck. But this is a lot. 5 mana is a lot. But for that cost, you get a 5-power flyer that brainstorms. So I think the card is pretty strong. I'm going to give it 3.5. Yes, I'm very serious. I think this is one of the better little mashups. You think 5 mana is a lot until 5 mana casts a thing they absolutely must deal with and also brainstorm. So it seems good to me. Invasion of Amonkhet is a disinformation campaign on the first half, and then a Scarab God token on the other half. It's a normal sort of average kind of battle that I don't really love. It really doesn't affect much about the game state at all when you first cast it. So I'm just going to give this a 1.5. It's really not that good. Invasion of Azgal is next. This is an Edict effect for 2 mana on the front half. And then you get a guy. You get a 2/1 menace that gets bigger as the game goes on. So really decent for limited play, and I think okay for standard too. I mean, I don't love a sorcery speed edict effect, but it's only 2 mana for a removal spell that like eventually might get you this dude. So just decent gravy. I don't mind this, and if Reaper ever gets up to like a 4-power guy, like you really didn't have to invest much for a removal spell on a 4-power guy, but you did have to invest some turns. So I'm not sure how much I love it, but just a 2-mana removal spell on a battle will probably make me rank these pretty highly. So I'll give it a 2.75. Rankle and Torbrand up next. I love this card, dude. 5 mana for a 3/4 flying, first strike, haste. Whenever it deals combat damage to a player, you can choose any number of these things. Everybody gets a treasure. Everybody sacrifices a creature, or you get to do two extra damage whenever you deal damage this turn, which is good because this thing has first strike, so it gets through for combat damage first and then puts extra damage on everybody else. This is great in an aggro deck, like anything with creatures, right? Because you want small creatures to sacrifice to it, for one. And you also want like a bunch of small guys that you can deal extra damage with this ability. So I like this dude a lot. I'm not sure 5 mana is too much. It might be in this case. In terms of spending 5 mana, I would much rather spend 5 mana on Hidetsugu and Kairi, just for the record, but I still think this is like potentially playable enough, and I know steps on your Invoke Despair, it's 5 mana. So it steps on the Invoke Despair slot in Rakdos, which is kind of lame, but either way, I do like the card, and I think if nothing else, it might see play after rotation, or even before. I'm going to give this card a 3. I think it's solid. Stormclaw Rager is 3 mana. It's, Rakdos for a 2/2, and you can sack stuff to it. Signpost for the Aristocrats deck in Limited, and so I'm going to give it a 2.25. Because it's a narrow application, but that is the one thing it's meant to do, and I think it's going to do it pretty well. Invasion of Ergamon. This is one of my favorite battles. When it comes into play, you get a treasure, and you get to rummage, discard a card and then draw. And then if you do flip it over, it becomes a 3/4 trample that kind of draws you a card. You know what I mean? Like you can discard a card and you search your library for a land or a battle. So I don't really care that much about the back half. I just want this in like Jund Reanimator, right? Discard my Atraxa and create a treasure token is a ridiculous turn 2 for that deck. And a couple of other decks for that matter. Discard my guy, create a treasure, like could be very good. So I think this is a pretty strong battle. I'm going to give it a solid 3. That's pretty high for what this actually does, but I just really like it. It shouldn't be that high. It should be a 2.5. This should be a 2.5 if I'm being real, if I'm being serious, but it's definitely a role player, but that's why it's 2.5. It's a role player that almost certainly sees play. 2.5, 2.75. Kogla and Yadaro up next, a 6 mana 7/7 boy that can either gain trample and haste when it ETBs or fight a guy. But before it does any of that, you can just discard it from your hand for 4 mana at instant speed, and then bust up an artifact or enchantment, put the card back into your library, and then draw a card. The card blows up 3 different permanent types, has a way of drawing a card, or can just come down for 7 trample haste damage. Like, the card has like a billion modes on it. It's so neat to me. This is one of my favorite team ups in terms of like actual function in a constructed deck. You could argue that 6 mana is too much, but I would argue back that maybe it's time to look at Gruul Ramp again, or Gruul Monsters. Anybody remember that deck from Pharaohs block? We got Pelucranos back. Maybe we can make it again. I think this card is just about wonderful. Although not amazing. So I'm going to give it a solid 3, though. That's a good score for a card like this that probably won't see all the play in the world, but will be a decent commander. Will see commander play in the 99 of certain decks, for that matter, and might sneak its way into standard depending on what we're doing. But let's move on to Rampaging Geoderm, a 4-mana 3/3 trample haste. When you attack, a creature gets +1/+1. If it's attacking a battle, you put a counter on it instead. So this is okay. I mean, it's blundering Raiju. It's nowhere near Thundering Raiju, so it's not going to see play while that card's in the format, and it will almost certainly never see play regardless. But in limited, you kind of get a 4-mana 4/4 trample haste, which is like really D stats and keywords. So I'm going to give this a 2.25. Botanical Brawler next. This is a neat card. It's just Selesnya, 2 mana, right? For a trample guy with 2 +1/+1 counters. But whenever one or more counters are put on a permanent you control, if it's the first time those +1/+1 counters have been put on permanent this turn, on that permanent specifically, then Brawler gets a +1/+1 counter. So it is worth noting again the way this is worded that if multiple things get a +1/+1 counter in a turn, this will get multiple counters. But if the same thing gets multiple counters, this only gets the 1 counter. That could matter when you have spells that distribute counters. Like let's say I cast Invoke Justice and I actually put counters on 4 different creatures that aren't Botanical Brawler, right? Well, that means Botanical Brawler gets 4 +1/+1 counters in that case. It works with that green overrun effect that we saw a little while back. You pay 4 mana for, distribute 4 counters. Well, Botanical Brawler probably gets a lot bigger if you have a relatively wide board there. And that's just in limited, right? I used Invoke Justice as an example a second ago, so I'm thinking about standard. I don't think this goes anywhere in standard. I don't know if there's a real +1/+1 counter deck, although we have seen a number of cards that mess around with them, so far in green. So there is that. It's not terrible. It really ain't bad. And I like the sort of +1/+1 counter theme in this set. We see that a lot, but we haven't seen it in a few sets. They've been straying away from it. They're kind of bringing it back here, and that's nice to see. I think it's a solid Magic card. I'll give it a 2.5. Galta and Mavrin Fane up next. 7 mana for a 12/12 trample that does dino stuff and vampire stuff. Again, Timmy bait here. I really want to like this card, but honestly, it doesn't do much when it comes into play. It technically could, because, you get to your attack step and it does stuff, but it just costs so much mana. For 7 mana, you could be doing so much better stuff. Atraxa, Kaya, all that. As far as reanimation spell or targets go, again, you could be getting Atraxa instead, and that's just better. You'd be getting Itali instead, and I think that's just better. So it's a neat little commander. It's a fun card. I want to own a copy of it and all that because, it's 2 of my favorite characters from one of my favorite planes. I think it's a cool card, but that's not going to increase your score. I'm going to give this a 2.25. I am sorry. Invasion of Moag is up next. This puts a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control. Again, very good with Botanical Brawler. And then it flips over into a 3/3 Ward 2. That puts a +1/+1 counter on a creature you control at the beginning of your end step. So you sort of Luminarch Aspirant, but not in time for your combat. You Alchemy Luminarch Aspirant when you flip it over. That doesn't look god-awful either, but it is pretty bad. It's not constructed playable whatsoever, but in limited, it is worth noting it's one of those things that kind of helps you break down the battle the turn that you play it because it puts counters on stuff. The creature it flips into is pretty good too. So I'll give this a 2. Solid. Drana Inland Vala. I really want to like you guys. You're the Orzhov Legends. Drana is one of my favorite characters, Inland Vala is cool too, for what it's worth. And these people shouldn't be working together. It's a neat little mashup. I want to like this card so much, but I just don't, guys. I'm real sorry. I think it really depends on what your opponent is playing. And I just tend not to like cards that rely on what my opponent's playing. I like to kind of premeditate my own deck and do stuff my deck does. You know what I mean? I don't want to rely on my opponent having sick activated abilities for this to be any good at all. So I'm going to give this a 2. I apologize. Invasion of New Capenna. This is in my top 3 sagas. So is Tolvada, though. But Orzhov got some crap and some really good stuff too. And these two battles are among the best battles in the set. But we'll look at New Capenna next. This is the one that when it enters the battlefield, you sacrifice a creature or artifact, and that exiles a creature or artifact they control. And you flip it over into Holy Frazzle Cannon, my favorite name for a card in this entire set. And this is an equipment. When an equipped creature attacks, it gets a +1/+1 counter, and each other creature you control that shares a creature type with it also gets a +1/+1 counter. The best thing about this is you equip it for just one, which is really neat. The thing about this is that a lot of the time you're attacking into battles. So if you do attack into New Capenna, you flip it over into HFC, then like you won't get to use HFC for a whole other turn cycle. And that's a little painful, but when you do get around to equipping it, it only costs one to equip. It's so good. So I just like this. I like the battles where like you would play the front half anyway. Like it's a pretty playable card regardless. And I think Rite of Oblivion's the better card. I really do. So I might just still play that until it rotates, but this is a playable-ish card on the front half. And on the back half, like if you actually have dudes to attack with, this is a really solid equipment. Like it actually is. So I love this thing. I'm going to give it a 2.75, which is probably a quarter point too high. Invasion of Tolvada is up next. This is the Orzhov Saga for 5 mana that resurrects a permanent, reanimates a permanent card. It's not like Invoke Justice. You know, it doesn't put counters on everything, but it doesn't need to when you can actually play it in your Orzhov deck without having to draw 4 planes in a row, you know what I mean? I like that. So I love Invasion of Tolvada. And then Broken Sky on the back half is pretty good for your tokens, right? Creature tokens you control get an Anthem and a lifelink, and you just get a 1/1 every turn. So it's like a wedding announcement that gives you a 2/1 flyer every turn with lifelink. Just ain't bad. Just ain't bad if you actually can flip it over. So this is probably my actual favorite battle in the entire set. In that it's probably the one I'm most likely to play, you know? So I like this thing. I think it's also extremely likely to see some amount of standard play at some point in its lifespan. So I'm going to give this card a 3. Yeah, I'm serious. Sculpted Perfection is up next. This is again for the Virexian, the Orzhov Phyrexia Commander deck. Your Phyrexians for 4 freaking mana get an Anthem effect, but hey, at least you incubate 2 when it ETBs. It's not a super great card, but you'll take that Anthem effect in your commander deck, your Phyrexia commander deck. But also, you'll probably take this Anthem effects in game, like in limited, right? Because like if all your incubator tokens are slightly bigger than their incubator tokens, then you win. Is that how it works? Probably not, but I'm just going to give this card a 2. It's all right. Baral and 2. Baral and Kairi Zev are up next. This thing, man. 3 mana for a 2/4 first strike menace. Already pretty good. 3 mana 2/4 can't be cut down, can't be lightning striked, and has 2 relevant keyword abilities. That's on rate alone, it's good. But whenever you cast your first instant or sorcery spell each turn, you may cast a spell with lesser value that shares a card type with it from your hand without paying its mana cost. Now, if you can't pull that off, you get you get Ragavan. You get a 2/1 haste, which is just stupid. I mean, this card, 3 mana for kind of 4 power if you cast another spell, but if it doesn't put extra power on the table, it just casts free spells. Like, that is potentially very good. I'm going to give this card a 3.5, and again, that's probably a quarter point too high, but I would rather be a quarter point too high than a quarter point too low for reasons I don't want to go into because it'll hurt my speed run. So let's keep going with Invasion of Kaladesh. This is 2 mana. Is it colors? And when it comes into play, you get a 1/1 Thopter. If you can flip it over, you get a thing that is kind of inferior to an uncommon that they printed in the last set that no one plays. So I don't know about this one, but I can't even say that I'm not going to pay 2 mana for a 1/1 flyer in standard. I'm probably not going to do that either. So at least it's an artifact. That might count, but not enough. I'm going to give this thing a 2.25, and that's probably really too much to my mind, but maybe it's better than I think. Joyful Storm Sculptor is up next. The Cloud Goat Ranger of the set. I always think of this as Cloud Goat Ranger. It's 5 mana 2/3 that puts 2/1/1 tokens into play. And whenever you cast a spell with Convoke, it deals 1 damage to each opponent in each battle they protect. So kind of neat. You're not going to deal like all 20 damage by by casting Convoke spells unlimited or anything, but it is 5 mana for 3 bodies. That's very defensive, lets you block and cast a lot of Convoke spells, right? So this will take something from, 8 mana with Convoke down to 5 mana, which is just great, just by itself, which is pretty good. But I still don't think, like, outside of the very specific draft deck that's playing, a lot of Convoke spells and like one big finish, outside of that, I don't think it's great. But even outside of those decks, again, it's 3 bodies, which could be worse. So I'm going to give this a 2.5. I think it's in that neighborhood somewhere. 2.25. Yeah, probably 2.25. The thing is, it looks narrow, so I want to give it a 2.25, but it's actually not that narrow because it makes 3 bodies no matter what. But is that worth 5 mana? I don't know. But Elvish Vatkeeper comes up next. This is 3 mana for a 3/3 that incubates 2 when it ETBs. And you can double the number of +1/+1 counters on a transform token if you pay the 5 mana, right? Sort of. When you can transform it that way for 5 mana rather than the usual 2 to double the number of counters on it. This is kind of neat. Again, breadcrumb, signpost, uncommon for like an incubate deck, even though a lot of cards with incubate are white. So that's kind of weird, but there's plenty of green and blue ones, or green and black ones too. 3 mana 3/3 is a decent stat line in and of itself. And again, if you're at parity with your opponent, you're just kind of banking incubator tokens, and eventually you both spend mana to make them into creatures and all that. Being able to have the bigger incubator tokens seems pretty good in a war of attrition, which is what this format looks like. Slower, plotting, methodical, board presence matters. I know I've already said all this, but just want to reiterate, this looks like a pretty slow but fun limited environment, and the ability to break parity with their incubator tokens might be kind of important, but again, 5 mana is so much, and you might want to use that mana more wisely. But if nothing else, you get a 3 mana 3/3 that technically puts another body on the table. So I'll give this a 2.25. Let's move on to Glissa Simpson. Glissa, Herald of Predation. This is 5 mana for a 3/5. Beginning of combat on your turn, you can either incubate 2 twice or transform all your incubators, or have your Phyrexians gain First Strike and Death Touch. Remember, she's a Phyrexian, so she can gain First Strike and Death Touch if she wants to. This is not as good in a lot of ways as the 3 mana Glissa. Obviously, it's the obvious comparison. I have to do it. But there is something about this that I like. A 5 mana 3/5, not the best stats in the world, right? But the first turn that it's out, if it's not immediately killed, you know what I mean? Then you get 2 incubator tokens. You get 2 tokens, sort of. You have to spend mana to make them into dudes. But the turn this comes out, you will almost certainly incubate 2 twice, which is technically banking more power and toughness. If Glissa's out for another turn after that, you can incubate twice again. Like at this point, if they take care of Glissa at any point in the game, you've still kind of put 8 power out, haven't you? That's not bad. It's just, it costs mana to do it, but like to make them actual creatures. But there's just something about this that I like, and I don't think it's worth 5 mana, but it's a little bit of a board in a box, isn't it? Like, let's say they wipe the board, okay? They wipe the board. You play Glissa. You make 2 guys, all right? Next turn, you swing for 3 and you make 2 guys. They've got to find a removal spell for this, like right now. And even if they find a removal spell for the Glissa, you've got a bunch of dudes. If they found a sweeper, they have to use the sweeper to kill the Glissa before the Glissa kills them. But if they use their sweeper, you've got like 4 incubator tokens. You can just, like EOT, make them into dudes and then swing with those. So I just think that it's possible this card puts your opponent in a really weird situation some of the time. So I'm interested in it. I've got my eye on it, but I don't think it's incredible. I'm going to give the card like a 2.5. I think it's probably close to there, but I've got a feeling that tonight's going to be a good night. Invasion of Lorwyn is up next. This is the one that does an impression of binding the old gods by blowing up a thing with, it's only a creature. It's a non-elf creature an opponent controls with power X or less, where X is the number of land you control. So again, nowhere near binding, but it becomes winnowing forces. 6 mana is enough to play this. You'll probably play this, I assume, in limited, because it's a removal spell on a body. Like it's a removal spell that comes like a 6/6. That seems okay in limited, so I had to give it like a 2.5 or 2.25 likely because it costs so much. But This is a pretty decent card in limited, especially if you ever can get it flipped over. In standard, probably not, but we'll see. Yargle and Multani. This is just a 6-mana vanilla 18/6. I'm going to give it a 1.5. I do love the card, though. Don't get me wrong. And the flavor text is hilarious. Jeru and Hazaret up next. 5 mana for a 5/4 as long as you're heck bent. It has vigilance and haste. When it attacks, look at the top 6 of your library, exile a legendary from among them, put the rest in the bottom of your library in a random order. Till end of turn, you can cast that legendary creature you exiled without paying its mana cost. Just pretty good in legendary decks, but again, a little bit narrow. A little difficult to facilitate depending on what you're doing and stuff. I've already talked about the tension with this card, is that you want to play it in such a way that you can get a free 7 mana legend or something. But if you do that, you have to put 7 mana legends in your deck, which decreases the ability to go heck bent, right? So, again, tension. But I still think the card is pretty freaking cool. I'm going to give it a 2.75. Invasion of Kylum is up next. This is one of those that seems decent and limited to me because it technically makes it easier to kill it the turn it comes into play. You know, it gives your creatures a total of +4/+0. And that is, 80% of what you need to flip this battle. That's not bad. When it does flip over, you get this thing that makes 6 power and potentially puts more power on those tokens when they attack. So not the worst thing in the world, but definitely I don't think it's constructed playable. Although maybe it's just one of those things that like will surprise you, but I really doubt that. In limited though, this is also just kind of okay, So I'm going to go ahead and give it a 2. It's somewhere around there. 1.75. Mirror Shield Hoplite is very parasitic to backup. You got to have a bunch of backup dudes, but I actually think this is one of the better like small creatures for a specific archetype in the entire limited environment. I think doubling up on backup is ridiculous, and there's going to be a lot of people early in the limited environment that do not take their opportunity to kill this guy on turn 2, and you just get bodied. Like the next turn, they get all the value in the world off double backup. So I think this guy's actually sick and limited, and I want to build a backup deck in standard, but I think that doesn't show all the promise in the world. We'll see, right? But as it stands, I'm just going to give this guy a solid 2. I think he's a really important piece in basically like the aggro deck in the limited environment. Quintorius Lore Master. You guys know how much I like this card, and I've justified it to hell and back over and over why I like this card as much as I do, but this is where we put our big boy pants on and we be objective. So I'm going to give Quintorius a 2.5, which just for the record is too much. This card is a 2.25, but my like for it has given it an extra 1/4 of a point. Probably a bulk rare, but we'll see. It's a bomb in limited, right? Inga and Isika. This one probably doesn't quite get there for me either. 4 mana for a 4/4 isn't the most impressive stat line in the world. This first line of text with the tap all your guys and they make mana. Drawing a card if you tap 3 or more dudes to cast a spell. Like, it's all neat. It's all cool in Commander. Seems fine. You'll play it as a curve filler in limited, if only because it's a decent rate for the cost and all that stuff. The art is some of my favorite art in the set. There's a lot to like about the card, but again, in a spiky kind of objectively, what is this card going to do in constructed kind of way, I don't think it's that great. I'm going to give it a 2.5. Invasion of Pyrulia is up next. This is the Simic one that whenever it enters the battlefield, scry 3, reveal the top of your library. If it's a land or double face, draw a card. And then on the back, it becomes Gargantuan Slabhorn, a 4/4 trample ward 2 that gives other transform permanents those same abilities. So, neat little dude. It's not quite Growth Spiral, though. I hate that it just puts a thing in your hand, which is a little bit lame. So I don't love this thing. I'm just going to give it a 1.75. Mutagen Connoisseur is up next. 3 mana for a 0/5. It's this guy, right? He gets extra power for each transform permanent you control. This could get up to like a 3/5 somewhat easily in limited, but if it does get up to a 3/5, imagine how much mana you've spent. At least 6. You know what I mean? But I don't like to look at it that way. I like to look at it as I'm going to transform these guys anyway because there's like 100 transform things in this set plus all the incubator tokens. So like I'm going to be transforming things. This is just extra value for transforming things. And in the meantime, it blocks like everything. So I don't hate this. I don't think I like Simic so much from what I can tell as far as color combinations. But some of these gold Simic cards, they've juiced a little bit, which again makes me think that Simic was not the strongest color combination. until they tweak these gold cards to juice them slightly. But I still don't think I love the way Simic looks in this set in draft or limited, sealed at all. Limited at all. So I'm not a huge fan of Connoisseur altogether, but I will give him a 1.75. Croxa and Kuneros. There's just so many of these that I love. But again, I have to not be too excited about some of these. I think Croxa and Kuneros is probably actually like a 2.5. It costs all the mana in the world. It does do something when it ETBs. It does do that, but you need 6 things in your yard. One of them has to be a big creature to actually work. And I don't know. I really want to like this card. I love these 2 characters. We're going to play it on stream. It looks fun, but again, that doesn't necessarily affect the rating. My personal rating on this card is a 4. My actual rating on this card is a 2.5. It needs to be better. But Boreamos and Fibblethip coming up next. I wonder if they see eye to eye. Anyway, this is a great card. 5 mana to definitely draw a card when it comes into play. Guaranteed. No matter what. But aside from that, you can also, if you discard lands, zap a dude. So 5 mana, 6 power guy, draw a card, zap a dude some of the time. And if your opponent can deal with it on open mana, you can just put it into your library and just do it all over again. You know what I mean? I don't think I'll mind in a few turns if I'm still alive. That's the problem, right? But if I'm still alive, I don't think I'll mind paying another 5 mana to draw another card on my 6/5. I just, Teamer isn't the most played color combination, and I don't think this card makes it the most played color combination overnight or anything, but I'm still going to give this thing a solid 2.75. I think it's a fine Magic card. Thalia and the Gitrog Manster over here. This is one that people are freaking out about this card. You guys were mad that this wasn't on my, the top 10 cards that I can't wait to play, so far. Halfway through spoiler season, I did a video where I listed 10 cards that, I really wanted to play with. I just couldn't wait. And so many people in the comments were like, why is Thalia the Gitrog Monster not on this list? It would have been my number 1 and all that. And it's because people, different strokes, different folks and all that. But I can obviously tell this is a great card. It does so many annoying things. It has First Strike and Death Touch, maybe the best combination of 2 keyword abilities, It's got Exploration on it, play an additional land. It's got 3 mana Thalia ability on it, which is actually really annoying. The creatures and non-basics into the battlefield tapped on your opponent's side. And it's got this Gitrog Monster ability that draws cards. The card does 4 distinct and very different things that matter at all different points in the game, right? So just kind of a gross card. I'm going to give this a 3.5 as well. I haven't really gone too far over that score too much in this video. And that's because I probably should have given Elish Norn and Sheoldred 4s. I probably should have given them both 4s, to be honest with you. I don't want to amend their scores or anything, but I think this is a set with very many very good cards, but I'm not sure this is a set with very many broken cards, broken good or anything. But I do think Thalia looks very annoying to have to play a game of magical cards against, so I'm going to give it a 3.5. I think it is just that good. You have to be better than Wandering Emperor and Sheoldred in this color combination to see play, and that is a lot to ask, but I think they came as close as they could. You know what I mean? So let's move on to Zurgo and Ojutai. This is, again, just a wonderful card. I think this might be one of the better mashups, period, in the whole set for constructed play. It's the 5 mana 4/4 flying haste. It has hexproof. It enters the battlefield this turn. It anticipates when it hits for combat damage. Matter of fact, when a dragon does damage to a combat player, when 1 or more does, you anticipate. And then you can dash it back to your hand like a card with dash, like Zurgo, right? I think that this is phenomenal. I really do. I think this is very, very difficult to deal with on a couple of axes, right? It's got hexproof, so they can't target it with an instant speed removal spell. It pops back to your hand, so they can't sweep it away. It is very difficult outside of Edict effects, which there are some of. Sheoldred's Edict exists, but that's it's 1 card. You know what I mean? Usually there'd be a bunch of cards that could kill this. There's 1 card that can kill this in standard. And that's good. You might not be able to pay 5 mana on every turn of the game from here on out. and win the game. Cast one spell over and over for the rest of the game and win. But here's my counter to that. You might. You might be able to do that. As the game goes on, you get more mana and be able to cast the stuff you're getting off the top of your library. You might decide not to pop it back to your hand because you have something better in your hand that you're able to get off the top of your library with this. I just think 5 mana is a good bit much. Jeskai isn't super represented in Standard right now, but at the same time, 4/4 flying haste, hexproof the turn it comes into play, which is the only turn it's going to be into play, and it actually gets you card selection. Like, this is great to me, dude. I'll give this a 3.5 as well. I'll go ahead and do that. We'll move on to Zimini and Dina. This is a Sultai Legend. It's a 3/4 that we have talked a lot about on the channel. This was like my number 1 or 2 card that I couldn't wait to play with in that same video I just referenced. There's a reason for that. It does everything I want it to do in a cool color combination with a couple of cool characters, and it's super cool. Just the coolest card I've ever seen. So again, my personal rating on this would be like a 4.75, but my actual rating on this, sadly, is probably closer to a 2.25. I think it's a really good commander for what that's worth. I think it'd be a really just hella fun commander to mess around with, but I feared that it's not quite where it needs to be in constructed formats. That said, a 3-mana 3/4 isn't the worst thing in the world stat-wise. That could be worse. And if it sticks around for even one turn, it can start doing some really, some very gross stuff. You know what I mean? But it's got to stick around for that turn. It has to do that. I will say this. It's a 3-drop that can block like a Graveyard Trespasser, or Corpse Appraiser, or a Fable of the Mirror Breaker token, and it survives against all these things. And I think that is actually pretty relevant. 3/3 is a very important stat line. So when you can break that for the same amount of mana usually, I know I said Fable in there too, but you know what I mean. Corpse Appraiser, Graveyard Trespasser. 3-mana 3/3 is an important stat line. So when you can deal with that and live, I think that's actually kind of important. Gix is a 3-mana 3/3, right? So it's kind of important to point that out. But as it is, I really don't think this is that much better than like a 2.25 in a constructed environment. I'm sorry about that. Invasion of Alara is up next. Costs Wooburg for everything. The card does everything. If you can think of a card or a thing that Magic cards do, this card does it. I am going to give this card a 3. Wooburg is a lot. Obviously, it's kind of tough to put that together, but it's not as tough as you might think. Honestly, Wooburg can be played pretty easily. And you get a free 4-drop off the top of your library. And if you do attack it down, which costs a 7, it costs a freaking a lot. But if you can't attack it down, you just do all this. You do all this. And don't even look at what's in the middle. The stuff in the middle can be done and taken advantage of and all that stuff. But really, if you flip it over and draw 2 and destroy a permanent, that's pretty good. You know, it just costs you 7 defense to do that. But I'm still going to give this a 3 because I think it's pretty good on the front face alone. But hold on. Oh, wait. Cough button. All right. Omnath, Locus of All is a Wooburg, but the black is Virexian for a 4/4. This is one of the first cards that we saw in the set. And I still think this card is pretty good too. Although I've soured on it, I've chilled on it slightly since the first time we saw it, especially when we see the power level of some of the other stuff in the set. But I'm still going to give this card a 3, which is, again, remember, a very solid score. I think it's playable in certain things. And that's all I'll say. I think that Omnath is probably a good like historic brawl commander more than just about anything. But this could be a standard playable card. Oh boy, here we go. Flywheel Racer is our first of the artifacts here. I kind of like this. It's 2 mana for a Vigilant 3/2 vehicle that crews for 1, and you can tap it for a mana of any color. You can only activate this if Flywheel Racer is a creature. Here's the thing, that kind of sucks. I want a 2 mana rock in standard, but I understand why Wizards is apprehensive to give us like a good 2 mana rock. Now, this though, ladies and gentlemen, this can technically tap on turn 2 if you played a 1/1 on 1. And that ain't too hard to do. It really ain't. And in the meantime, it's a 2 mana 3/2 Vigilance. Like that might die on blocks. It could die on blocks, but there are situations where you play this on 2, and then on turn 3, you can either play any creature in the world, basically, and attack for 3 on 3, or you can, play a small creature or have played a creature on turn 1, right? And basically ramp into a 4-drop on 3 because of this guy. Which both of those are decent situations. I don't hate this card. I don't think this card is terrible, but I'm going to give it a 2.25, which is, again, probably higher than it deserves. I'm just excited about a 2-mana rock, even if you got to work for it, especially considering it's a 2-mana rock that can attack, which might make it actually very quite good. But let's move on to Frogmite. It's actually called Halo Hopper this time around, but it's a 3-mana 3/2 Convoke, and it's a frog. And it's supposed to remind you of Frogmite, even if it's not Frogmite. You never had to tap the creatures to play Frogmite. It just has affinity for artifacts. This is way different, but I still think a potentially free 3/2. Pretty good, you know? It's not bad. Even if you just tap, if you tap 2 guys, and you get a 1-mana 3/2. That ain't terrible. I like creatures with Convoke because, yeah, you tapped creatures down to play them on your turn, but you're playing a creature, which means you'll still have a blocker, you know? So I don't hate this dude. I think he's a solid 2. Invasion of Ravnica is the colorless one. It, does it exile yet? Exiles a non-land permanent that isn't exactly 2 colors, so don't try to cast it on Blood Tithe Harvester, everybody. And when you flip it over for how much? It's 4. Yeah, it's 4 to flip it over. Whenever you cast a spell that's exactly 2 colors, look at the top 6 cards of your library, reveal a card that's exactly 2 colors from among them, put it into your hand. Put the rest in the bottom of your library in a random order, and then you'll note that this technically just loops. Because you cast a spell that's 2 colors, it'll find you a spell that's 2 colors, you'll cast that spell, you'll loop, it'll keep doing this so long as you find spells that are 2 colors and cast them, which is really neat. 4 is not that much defense, dude. You could attack that down, and this helps you attack it down, right? It takes the biggest thing off of your opponent's side of the table, and it's non-land permanent, and any deck can play it. And you can say that this is what, Introduction to Annihilation from Strixhaven, but that card mostly sucked because A, it had a massive downside. Your opponent got to draw a card, right? Second of all, it didn't flip over into a thing that draws a million cards, which this does. So I don't know, man. Like, I actually think this is has solid potential, even though 5 mana is a lot. It really is. But we always try to make mono colorless a thing, even though if you flip it over, it doesn't really do much in mono colorless. It is a exile removal spell for a non-land permanent in your colorless deck, and I'll take it there too. So just a neat little battle in Commander. It might be semi-constructed playable given what our options are. And in Limited, you play every single copy of this. Again, you might not flip it over, but it's a 5-mana unconditional removal spell against any non-land permanent. So you might play that. So I'm going to give this card a 2.75. Or maybe, no, let's give it a 3. The card drawing ability and the Commander playability, let's settle in at 3. I think it's around there somewhere. Kite Sail is a reprint. This has always been the equipment that gives a creature flying, and it's always been about a 1.75. Virexian Archivist is next, a 6-mana 4/5 reach that lets you put stuff from graveyards on the bottom. This is just not a good card. I'll give it a 1.25. Realm Breaker, the Invasion Tree. This is a janky little bit right here, but it's neat. I like that it gets your opponent's lands to you. It's kind of neat. Neat in Commander where there's fetches and stuff like that. Just more prevalent, whatever. And you don't mind taking some time off to spend this mana to play the card in the first place. Now, if you can get to 10 mana in Commander and put 12 Predators on the table, or however many there are in Magic history, there's probably more than that. Yeah, there are. But either way, if you can do the 10 mana thing, then it seems like it might win you the game, but obviously it's a little much. I don't know how practical this card is. It looks like a flavor thing, and they were trying to find a cool, again, flavorific thing for it to do, but altogether, I really can't give this more than a 2. Skittering Surveyor is another reprint, as a matter of fact, and it's never that bad. I know it looks bad, but in Sealed, this can be okay to make sure you get that 4th land drop, and you can play your actual good cards and stuff. I'm just going to give this a 1.75. Sword of Once and Future. This is the equipment in the set. The creature obviously gets protection from blue and black. It was the only color combination left that hadn't been a sword. It's +2/+2, and whenever the creature deals combat damage to a player, surveil 2 and then cast an instant or sorcery with mana value 2 or less from your graveyard without paying that mana cost, baby. What a ridiculous card, right? What are swords? What do you rate swords? Obviously, it depends on the sword, but there's not much more than a quarter of a half point difference between a lot of these. I think the Izzet might be the sword might be the best one ever printed, but that's obviously a conversation and debate really for another day, because no matter which word you say, people are going to be like, no, it's the Orzhov sword or whatever, As far as this in the pantheon, the tier list of swords, I'm not really sure where it goes, but I think it's better than the Gruul one that got spoiled a couple of sets ago. And I will call this a 3. Let's just give swords a solid 3. Why not? I don't think they're that standard playable, but Commander protection from black is a really good thing to have. So let's move on to the final card of the set, Urn of Godfire. Is it? Urn of Godfire is 1 mana. For an artifact, you can pay 2 and filter mana, or you can pay 6, tap it, and sack it to destroy a creature or enchantment. Not a terrible limited card, but pretty bad, all things considered. I'm going to call this a 1.75 because it's technically removal. Have we done it? We got all these, all these 10 cent. Oh my God, we did it. All these 10 cent dual lands that come into play tapped and gain a life. I forgot those are even in the set. And then obviously the basic lands. What's the best basic land of these basic lands? I like the plains. I like the island. I like the swamp a little bit, but these aren't the best plains, swamps, or islands. For my money, it's hard to find a good forest, and that is a very good looking forest. Honestly, I like that forest. But anyway, hit the timer. I think we actually did it, ladies and gentlemen. I think we actually did it. I think that might be a new record. I can't remember when we came in, but I think it was at like 47 minutes or something. And our last time was like 3 hours and 40 something minutes. And we have been able to get it in about 3 hours, which is one of our best times, if not our best time ever. So really got to get an actual stopwatch or like one of those speed running clocks on screen for stuff like this. But I think we may have actually, in a set where every freaking card transforms and has double sides, I think we do have a new personal best. I'm pretty sure, ladies and gentlemen. And it wasn't like I was unwordy. You know what I mean? I said stuff. You timed 3 hours and 7 minutes. That ain't bad. Thanks Korean Front Dash for the timing. Not bad, dude. Yeah, gold. That's where we are now number 1 in the world at reviewing this set. Somebody try to beat my time. It's actually pretty easy. You could just go through and be like 2.5, 2.5, 1.5, 1.25. You could do that if you wanted to, but I'd like for there to be, here's the actual challenge. Can you do a speed run of a set review and also say actual things? There's a happy medium. I don't know what the rule set is for these speed runs, but I'll make it up as I go along.